Hello there and welcome to Life Beyond Seen, where curiosity settles in, the mind gets a little quieter, and sleep never has to argue with learning. Tonight, we're going somewhere very different from the usual edges of thought and science. We're heading into a place so deep, so remote, and so unbelievably quiet that most of the world will never think about it at all. It's the Tonga Trench, a long narrow scar in the Pacific Ocean floor that drops so far down that sunlight isn't even a rumour there. If the surface of the ocean is the world we recognise, the trench is the world we never see, a place that makes even seasoned explorers pause and exhale. But here we are, sinking into it gently, letting the weight of the day fall away as we follow a path that bends straight down into the deepest water on Earth's eastern side. Before we begin, I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight. Is it late evening where you are? Maybe you're settling into bed or sitting in a quiet room waiting for sleep to catch up with you. Or maybe it's earlier, and you're just in the mood to drift through something slow and steady. Wherever you are, it's nice to have you here. And if you find this slow dive comforting or calming, it would mean a lot if you gave the video a like or maybe subscribed. It helps this quiet corner find others who might also want a place to rest their thoughts for a while. Now, whenever you're comfortable, let's begin our descent, because the Tonga Trench isn't just a deep spot in the ocean. It's one of the most extreme environments on the planet, a place shaped by forces so large and so steady that they've been working for tens of millions of years without ever asking for our attention. The trench is often overshadowed by one of its cousins, the Mariana Trench, which is slightly deeper, but the Tonga Trench has its own remarkable personality. It's the fastest subducting plate boundary on Earth, where the Pacific Plate slides under the Indo-Australian Plate at a surprising pace. That downward motion forces the seafloor to bend and crack, forming a long, narrow depression that plunges to about 10,800 metres at its deepest confirmed point. To put that in perspective, if you took Mount Everest and tucked it inside, the summit would still be more than a kilometre underwater. And yet, as remote as that sounds, life has found ways to survive there, shaping itself over millions of years into forms that work in conditions we would consider impossible. As we sink farther into this narrative, picture the way the ocean changes around us, not as a dramatic cinematic drop, but as a gradual shift. The upper layers of the Pacific are busy places. Waves roll, wind pushes, currents swirl. But beneath that surface, things begin to settle. Light fades gradually at first, then sharply, until colours vanish and only faint shapes remain. The water grows colder, pressing in from all sides with a steady, quiet strength. If sound travelled through the ocean from distant storms or migrating whales, it softens here, until even the echoes feel like memories. The descent isn't rushed. Nothing in the deep ocean is rushed. Everything takes the time it takes. There's something unhurried about these environments. Not peaceful exactly, because peaceful suggests something soft or gentle. The deep ocean isn't gentle, it's simply indifferent. The conditions don't shift for visitors. They're constant, strict, and far beyond human comfort. Down here, pressure doesn't feel like a heavy weight, but like an unavoidable presence. The deeper you go, the more the ocean asserts itself. At 1,000 metres down, the pressure is already about 100 times what you're feeling right now. Farther still, it ramps up in ways that make air feel like a forgotten luxury. At the depth of the Tonga Trench, the pressure is more than 1,000 times what your body experiences at sea level. That means every square centimetre has to withstand forces that can crush steel if it isn't built for the task. And yet, creatures live there. Not just one or two stragglers, but a full ecosystem built on tiny energy sources that wouldn't keep a candle lit on the surface. This place isn't empty, it's just unfamiliar. As we continue drifting downward in our imagination, the world above starts to feel far away. Waves, sunlight, and surface noise are replaced by something consistent and cool. Water temperature drops close to freezing, though it stays just above it because of the salt content and a slow, steady circulation of deep currents. There's no day or night cycle here, no storms, no seasons. The trench isn't shaped by weather but by tectonics, pressure, chemistry, and the quiet persistence of life. It's not chaotic, it's methodical. Many of us imagine the deep ocean as a void, a huge empty space without movement or activity. But that isn't accurate. Even in the trench, the ocean is working. Particles fall from the surface, tiny fragments of dead plankton, fish scales, bits of organic matter. Scientists call this marine snow, though it doesn't look much like snowflakes. It's slower, finer, and more constant. Think of it as the ocean's version of dust, settling over everything without hurry. This continuous drift of material is what feeds much of the deep ocean life. Without sunlight, organisms here rely on whatever falls from above or what they can extract from chemical reactions around them. It's a different kind of food chain, more patient and extremely efficient. Now imagine that as we continue our descent, even the faint light filtering from far above disappears completely. At this depth, there is no natural light, not even the suggestion of it. The only illumination comes from organisms that make their own. Bioluminescence isn't rare in the deep ocean. It's common, but in the trench, creatures don't shine brightly. They use carefully timed flashes or subtle glows for communication, hunting, or avoiding being hunted. The glowing patterns aren't beautiful in the artistic sense. They're practical. Everything in the trench is practical. The Tonga Trench also has a unique topography. It isn't a smooth, clean cut. It's rugged, fractured, and shaped by millions of years of subduction. The walls are steep in places and more gradual in others. Landslides are not rare. Sediment flows can travel down its sides, stirring up clouds of fine particles that settle slowly over time. The floor isn't flat. It's uneven, shaped by the constant motion of the plates below. And yet, despite all of this movement, the trench feels steady because the shifts happen on timescales far longer than any human lifetime. As we picture ourselves drifting deeper, imagine reaching a point where familiar fish shapes fade away. Midwater species vanish, replaced by animals adapted to extreme darkness and pressure. Many are gelatinous, with bodies that don't rely on heavy skeletons. Some have skin so thin it looks like a film of water. Others have jaws that fold wider than seems reasonable given their size because food is rare, and when it appears you take what you can get. Vision becomes less important. Smell, vibration detection, and sensitivity to pressure changes become the main tools for survival. Every meter we sink into the trench takes us closer to a world where evolution has shaped life differently. Not better, not worse, just differently. Some creatures here grow slowly, some live surprisingly long lives. Others reproduce in ways that seem odd but are completely logical for the environment. There is no wasted energy. Every adaptation solves a problem that surface life doesn't have to think about. If you could stand on the floor of the Tonga Trench, not that anyone could without protection, the experience wouldn't be dramatic. It would be quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you aware of your own presence more than anything else. The water is near freezing. The pressure enormous. The landscape unfamiliar, with fine sediment layers and small ridges shaped by geological movement. There are creatures here, but they don't move much unless they need to. Their energy budgets are strict. Their lives are slow, not peaceful again, but deliberate. What makes this place so interesting isn't that it's hostile. Many places on Earth are hostile. What makes the Tonga Trench fascinating is how thoroughly life has adapted to it. The organisms here don't merely survive the conditions, they depend on them. Remove the pressure, change the temperature, or expose them to light, and they wouldn't thrive. Some wouldn't survive at all. Their internal chemistry is built for the environment most of us would consider unlivable. That's the beauty of studying extreme environments. They remind us that life on Earth is versatile. It has explored nearly every corner of the planet over billions of years. It doesn't need comfort, it needs consistency, and the Tonga Trench is nothing if not consistent. Before we leave this first stretch of our descent, think about how little of the ocean has been explored. Not in a dramatic way, just factually. More than 80% of the world's ocean floor remains unmapped in high detail. The deeper you go, the fewer measurements we have. The trench itself has been visited by only a handful of submersibles. Most of what we know comes from remotely operated vehicles, pressure-resistant cameras, sonar mapping, and sediment samples. There's a vast amount of information left to uncover, not because it's hidden, but because it's difficult to reach. Yet even with the limited data we have, the trench tells us a lot about how the Earth works. It tells us about plate tectonics, deep sea circulation, chemistry and biology. It even gives clues about how life might exist elsewhere in the universe. If organisms can thrive here, in near total darkness, high pressure, and with minimal energy, then perhaps life can do the same on icy moons, deep subsurface oceans, or other extreme environments beyond Earth. For now, though, we're staying right here, continuing our steady drift downward. We've only begun to describe what the trench holds. There's a long way to go, and many layers of this undersea world to explore, from the geological forces shaping its walls to the faint flickers of the creatures that call it home. Whenever you're ready, we'll keep sinking into this environment, following the path the Pacific has carved over millions of years, looking at what lives in one of the planet's most remote places and how it survives. There's no need to rush. Everything in the deep moves at its own pace. We'll move with it. As we continue drifting downward through this unseen part of the Pacific, the story ahead shifts from the quiet calm of the water to the immense forces that shaped all of this long before anyone thought to name it. The Tonga Trench isn't just deep. It's a clear demonstration of what happens when the surface of the Earth stops behaving like a solid shell and instead reveals itself as something dynamic, slow-moving, and constantly reshaping. The world beneath the ocean isn't still. It moves, bends, sinks, and rises, even if all of it happens at a pace that makes human lifetime seem brief in comparison. And the trench we're sinking toward is one of the sharpest examples of those forces at work. Imagine the Earth's outer layer not as a single piece, but as a collection of massive sections, each one sliding over the surface of the mantle. Some of these plates push together, some pull apart, others slide past each other in ways that create earthquakes, volcanic arcs, and enormous ridges. The Tonga Trench exists because one of these boundaries has been pulling downward for millions of years. The Pacific Plate, which stretches under an enormous portion of the ocean, is slowly sinking beneath the Indo-Australian Plate in a process geologists refer to as subduction. The word itself sounds simple, but the scale of what it describes is anything but. This motion is not fast in any human sense. If you were to stand on the seafloor at the trench's edge, you wouldn't see the plates moving. You wouldn't feel anything shift beneath your feet. But on a geological timeline, the movement is dramatic. The Pacific Plate dives beneath the Indo-Australian Plate at up to 24 centimetres per year. For a long time, numbers like that feel abstract, because centimetres per year sounds almost unnoticeable. But place it over millions of years, and the picture becomes clear. The downward motion has pulled the seafloor into one of the deepest underwater valleys on the planet, carving a long, narrow form that stretches for more than 500 kilometres. To picture what this looks like, think less of a canyon, and more of a long fold in the seafloor. The trench is shaped like a crescent. Its sides are steep, and its floor sits at a depth that pushes the limits of what life can handle. Everything about it was created by the motion of these plates as they grind, bend, and descend into the mantle. This movement is relentless. It does not pause. It does not reverse. It simply continues a process started long before humans existed, long before the first complex species evolved in the oceans. As we descend farther in this narrative, Imagine the surface world above beginning to feel small. The Pacific stretches out in all directions, but beneath it lies this narrow scar, a place shaped not by storms or currents, but by deep earth mechanics. The trench isn't smooth or symmetrical. It's jagged in places, layered in others, with countless sections where the walls have slumped due to underwater landslides. These slumps don't create dramatic roars the way they do on land. Instead, in the deep ocean, they happen quietly. Sediment creeps and shifts until it loses support and slides downward in a slow collapse, sending clouds of fine particles drifting along the water. These underwater landslides reshape parts of the trench over centuries or millennia, gradually smoothing some areas and steepening others. Even with these events, the trench appears stable on human timescales. Its depth doesn't change dramatically in decades or centuries, but the forces shaping it never stop working. The Pacific Plate continues its descent. The Indo-Australian Plate continues to ride above it, and far beneath the trench floor, the subducted portion of the plate melts slowly into the mantle, fueling volcanic activity on the islands of Tonga and other locations along the tectonic boundary. This entire system is deeply interconnected, even though the trench itself seems isolated and separate from the world above. If you could observe the trench over 1 million years, you would see the seafloor bending downward like a slow-motion time-lapse. The trench deepens, shifts, and occasionally narrows. Adjacent ridges rise slightly or descend depending on the pressure placed on them. Sometimes earthquakes shake the region as tension builds and releases along the plate boundary. These quakes can move enormous slabs of seafloor by centimetres or even metres in an instant, but those shifts are part of a long chain of events driven by the constant sinking of the Pacific Plate. The people who live in Tonga and other islands along the boundary are familiar with this behaviour. Earthquakes are part of the region's natural pattern. Volcanic activity, including the eruption of underwater volcanoes, appears throughout the island arc, and while many of these events are small, some are large enough to alter coastlines or reorganise local landforms. The trench is part of a larger system that affects the entire region, even though few ever see its depths directly. For those of us drifting downward in our imaginations, the trench begins to take shape not just as a deep feature of the ocean, but as a place shaped by opposing forces. One plate is sinking, the other is rising slightly from the pressure placed on it. This contrast creates tension. It pulls the seafloor downward into a sharp bend. The pressure at the boundary is immense, the heat generated from friction between the plates is significant, and the material from the descending plate eventually melts, contributing to magma that feeds the volcanic arc above. Every part of this system speaks to the scale of planetary motion at work, even if it happens quietly and steadily. The trench also demonstrates how the ocean hides some of the planet's most dramatic geological features. On land, when plates collide, they create mountain ranges. The Himalayas, for example, are the result of the Indian plate pushing into the Eurasian plate. Mountains rise, valleys form, peaks reach into thin air. Underwater, a similar kind of collision results in trenches instead of mountains. The reason is simple. The plate being subducted is heavier, so it sinks. Its descent drags the seafloor downward, producing a trench instead of a ridge. But don't imagine the trench as a thin line or a narrow gash. Its width varies, and in some places the slopes extend for tens of kilometres. The descent isn't always abrupt. Some sections are steep, but others fall gradually, shaped by sediment sliding, shifting tectonics, and long-term erosion. Even underwater, erosion exists. Currents move along the slopes. Sediment builds up, then flows downward when it becomes unstable. Over time, these movements soften the seafloor in some places and expose raw rock in others. There is often a misconception that the deep ocean floor is flat. In reality, it's full of ridges, valleys, fractures and slopes. The Tonga Trench represents one of the deepest and most complex of these features. It is a long arc of geological activity that mirrors the island arc above it. The islands of Tonga form a curved chain that follows the trench's general shape, creating a clear example of how surface geography reflects the unseen boundaries beneath it. As we continue sinking deeper in this description, it becomes easier to see why the trench is such an important field of study. It gives geologists insight into the behaviour of plates, mantle dynamics, volcanic systems, and even how the oceans themselves evolve over long periods. The trench affects everything from deep-sea currents to the distribution of marine species. Its shape influences where sediment accumulates. Its pressure determines which organisms can survive in its depths. Its location impacts seismic activity across the entire region. Even though we rarely think of the seafloor as a place that's constantly moving, the Tonga Trench reminds us that Earth is not a still planet. Its surface is divided into pieces that drift slowly, directed by the slow churn of the mantle beneath. The trench is one of the clearest edges where this movement becomes visible through extreme depth. The crack in the Earth's armour is not a precise line, it is a zone, a region where the plates interact, and the trench itself, while narrow compared to the ocean's width, is broad compared to anything we experience on land. Its walls are kilometres tall, its slopes cover enormous distances. Its floor is a space where pressure and isolation define everything that can exist there. Humans have reached the trench floor only a few times. The pressure requires specialised equipment. The descent takes hours, and the environment at the bottom is too harsh for direct observation without highly reinforced vessels. Still, each expedition reveals more about the geology of the region. Cameras capture footage of fine sediment flows. Instruments measure the temperature and chemistry of the water. Sediment cores reveal layers of material that have settled over thousands of years. One detail that stands out about the trench is how dynamic it remains. Subduction zones are active. They generate movement. They produce earthquakes. They reshape the ocean floor. Even though the trench seems like a stable, permanent part of the Earth's landscape, it is changing. Slowly, consistently, but undeniably. The trench isn't just the result of a crack. It's a system, a conveyor belt of ocean crust that sinks into the mantle, a geological cycle that consumes old seafloor and eventually contributes to new crust forming at mid-ocean ridges thousands of kilometres away. The ocean floor is constantly recycled through these processes, and trenches like the Tonga Trench are one of the primary entry points for this cycle. Without subduction zones, the Earth's surface would be vastly different. Mountains, volcanoes, oceans, and continents rely on these interactions to maintain the balance of forces that shape the planet over long timescales. For now, as we picture ourselves descending even deeper, it becomes clear that the trench is more than just depth. It is history carved into the ocean floor. It is motion embedded in rock. It is pressure turned into landscape. And with each metre downward, we find ourselves not just moving into a darker part of the ocean, but into a quieter version of Earth's geological story. There is no need to hurry through this part of the journey. The trench isn't going anywhere. The plates will continue their slow descent. The sea floor will continue bending. The island arc above will continue its rise. And we will continue drifting deeper into the next stretch of that story, where the darkness becomes complete and the conditions begin to shift from pressure and geology into the strange realities of life that endures far below anything the surface world ever notices. As we continue descending through this imagined stretch of the Pacific, the changes around us become more distinct in ways that don't depend on dramatic shifts or sudden revelations. Instead, everything transforms gradually, step by step, until the world we recognise fades out and something entirely different takes its place. Light, the familiar companion of our days, disappears long before we reach the trench itself. But down here, darkness isn't just the absence of sunlight. It's an environment with its own rules, its own structure, and a surprising amount of activity woven through it. The ocean loses colour before it loses brightness. Reds vanish first, then oranges, then yellows. By the time you reach deeper mesopelagic waters, everything looks blue and then grey, as if the ocean has decided to strip away anything that doesn't help with survival. And beyond that point, the last traces of brightness collapse into complete black. Not the kind of black you see when the lights go out in a room, because even then your eyes try to adjust. Down here they can't adjust to anything. There is nothing for them to find. This isn't a place where night arrives as a temporary visitor. The darkness is constant, unbroken, permanent. It's the same whether a storm rages at the surface or whether the Pacific lies flat and calm. Day and night don't exist here. Seasons don't touch this part of the world. Weather systems that churn above never reach it. The environment is steady in a way that feels almost foreign, even when we're only visualizing it from a safe distance. Everything you might expect from a living environment, shadows, flickers of movement, faint outlines, becomes something that depends entirely on the organisms that live here, because they are the only sources of light at all. Most animals living in the upper layers of the ocean rely on eyes adapted to low light, but below a certain depth, even those adaptations lose their value. Some of the creatures that begin to appear here still have eyes, but they are either extremely large or just functional enough to detect faint glows from nearby organisms. Others have lost their eyes entirely because maintaining vision in a place without light is inefficient. And in the deep ocean, efficiency matters. Every unnecessary function becomes a liability, so evolution trims details where they aren't needed. This region is shaped by darkness in ways that become more obvious the deeper we go. Even before reaching the trench itself, the water is already well below freezing if not for the salt that keeps it liquid. The cold slows biological processes. Movement becomes measured. Energy must be used sparingly. And since food is limited, creatures can't afford quick mistakes. They live slow lives, shaped by scarcity and caution. Though the environment is dark, it is not empty. Many deep-sea organisms create their own light through bioluminescence. It's easy to imagine these lights as bright and colourful, but most deep-sea glows are faint, pale blue or green, and appear in quick pulses or small dots rather than broad beams. These glimmers serve specific purposes. A fish might emit a quick flash to distract a predator, or a drifting organism might use a glow to attract prey. Some animals use bioluminescence to camouflage themselves by matching the dim glow from above, though down here that glow is so faint that it's barely useful. In the region surrounding the Tonga Trench, bioluminescence becomes rare as the depth increases. It doesn't disappear entirely, but the deeper the environment becomes, the smaller the number of organisms that rely on light to communicate. Many of the trench's inhabitants use chemical and mechanical signals instead. They sense changes in water movement. They detect vibrations. They rely on touch more than sight. Everything becomes slow. Everything becomes cautious. And everything becomes adapted to a world where light is a rare resource, not a constant presence. The darkness also changes how the environment feels emotionally as we imagine moving through it. It isn't threatening or hostile, it's indifferent. Nothing here cares whether something is watching or whether something is passing through. Darkness, pressure, and cold are simply the conditions that exist, and life has evolved around them. The pressure increases steadily as we descend. At a few hundred meters, it's already enough to crush air-filled cavities. At 1,000 meters, the pressure becomes a serious limiting factor for many species. Farther down, near the deepest regions of the trench, the pressure reaches more than 1,000 times what you feel at the surface. Any organism that survives here must be built to handle that constant force. There are no echoes in this darkness. Sound travels efficiently through the ocean, but without surfaces or structures to bounce off of, noises become dull or directionless. A creature moving nearby might produce a faint rustle or a soft shifting of water, but most movement is quiet. Even predators here rely more on stillness and patience than chase or speed. They wait for opportunities rather than pursuing them. If you could listen closely in this black water, you wouldn't hear familiar animal sounds. You might hear small pops from shifting organisms or faint vibrations from distant sources, but there would be no low rumbles or sharp calls associated with marine animals higher up in the water column. The deeper the environment becomes, the more the concept of sound loses its familiar structure. The darkness affects everything from feeding patterns to body structures. Many trench area species have gelatinous bodies that allow them to withstand extreme pressures without collapsing. They don't need rigid bones. Their tissues are soft, flexible, and filled with water matching the environment. This not only helps them survive, but also helps them conserve energy. Hard structures take effort to maintain. Soft structures adapt naturally. The deeper we imagine ourselves drifting, the fewer animals have recognizable shapes. Some have elongated bodies. Some have wide jaws disproportionate to their size, because any opportunity to feed must be taken fully. Some drift rather than swim. Some never move more than a few meters from where they started life. Everything is shaped by the need to survive with limited resources and without light. The darkness also influences how organisms reproduce. Many deep-sea animals release eggs or larvae that drift upward into higher, more food-rich waters. Once there, the young feed and grow before slowly descending back into the deep. This strategy increases the chances of survival because the upper layers of the ocean have more nutrients and more energy available. But eventually the organisms must return to darkness, where adults continue their slow lives. Down here, predators aren't defined by speed, they're defined by patience. Large eyes on some species allow them to detect even the faintest glimmer of light produced by a passing organism. Long, thin filaments act like sensors, helping animals detect the smallest changes in water movement. A shift of a few centimeters can indicate the presence of prey or danger. These organisms don't chase their meals across large distances. They wait for them to drift close enough. For many creatures that live near the trench, density becomes an advantage. Some species rely on body structures that match almost exactly the density of seawater, allowing them to hover without effort. Movement becomes minimal. Energy consumption becomes predictable. A creature might remain suspended for hours or days until something edible passes close enough to grab. As we drift through this description, it becomes clearer that darkness is not a passive part of the environment. It's an active force that shapes every detail of life in the trench. It defines sensory systems, movement patterns, feeding strategies, reproductive cycles, and evolutionary pathways. Over millions of years, organisms here have developed solutions to challenges that surface life never encounters. What remains surprising is how well adapted everything becomes. The deep ocean isn't a place filled with half-functional creatures struggling to survive. It's a stable environment with highly specialized life. Organisms here aren't fragile. They're perfectly suited to their surroundings. Remove them from the dark, high-pressure, low-energy world they were designed for, and they might fail. But in their own environment, they're resilient. The darkness also plays a part in how ecosystems form here. Since plants cannot grow without sunlight, food chains depend on different sources of energy. Marine snow provides a slow, steady supply of organic material. Occasionally, a large carcass from higher up in the ocean sinks to the bottom, feeding entire communities for weeks or months. In some areas, chemical reactions occurring within the sediment or near subduction zones support unique forms of microbial life. These microbes become the base of localized food webs that operate independently from the surface world. The Tonga Trench is notable for having some of the clearest examples of deep microbial ecosystems. Bacteria thrive within the sediment, breaking down organic material in conditions that would be lethal to other forms of life. These microbes tolerate pressure that would crush other organisms. They play a key role in recycling nutrients throughout the deep ocean. Some scientists study these bacteria to understand how life might develop on other planets or moons, where sunlight is absent and conditions resemble the deep ocean more than the surface world. Imagine being suspended in this environment for a moment longer. The water feels colder. The pressure grows heavier. The darkness becomes complete. The creatures around you move slowly, if they move at all. Each one is designed for exactly this level of blackness and silence. Nothing feels out of place. Nothing feels unplanned. This part of the ocean doesn't need sunlight, sound, or warmth to sustain life. It needs stability. And it has that in a way that few other ecosystems do. There's something grounding about that thought. Even without light, life has found a way to create rhythm and structure. The darkness doesn't hinder existence, it shapes it. And the more time we spend imagining this descent, the more the trench begins to take form not as a mysterious void, but as a functioning, orderly world that simply follows rules we don't encounter in our daily lives. As we continue downward toward the deepest parts of the Tonga Trench, the environment will shift again, but not suddenly. It will continue its slow transition into colder, denser, quieter spaces. The water becomes heavier, the creatures become rarer, the pressure becomes an all-encompassing presence, and the darkness remains steady, guiding the shape of everything that exists below it. When you're ready, we can continue drifting even farther, following the descent into a place where pressure becomes one of the dominant forces shaping life, where bodies must adapt not just to lack of light, but to the crushing weight of the entire ocean resting above them. As we continue sinking through this unseen stretch of the Pacific, the darkness around us becomes more familiar, almost predictable in its consistency. But there is another force waiting deeper down, a force far more influential than the absence of light. Pressure, that quiet and relentless presence, grows steadily with every meter, shaping the environment in ways that aren't immediately obvious until you try to imagine what it really means to live under its constant push. When people describe the deepest parts of the ocean, they often mention darkness first, but for the organisms that survive at the bottom of the Tonga Trench, pressure is the true architect of their existence. At the surface, we live under a single atmosphere of pressure. It doesn't feel like anything because our bodies are balanced against it. Our internal fluids match the outside push. But as we descend through the ocean, pressure increases by roughly 1 atmosphere every 10 meters. That means at 100 meters the pressure is about 10 times what you feel right now. At 1,000 meters it's 100 times. And at the floor of the Tonga Trench, the pressure reaches more than 1,000 atmospheres. Every square centimetre of any object is pushed upon by a force so immense that it's difficult to compare it to anything practical. Imagining it as a weight isn't precise, because weight depends on gravity and surface area, but the concept still helps explain what the environment feels like. It's a steady, unyielding push from all directions, and nothing that lives here escapes it. For humans, such pressure is instantly fatal without heavy reinforcement. Even submarines built for deep exploration have to be shaped to distribute force evenly. Rounded structures, thick hulls, and specialized composites are necessary just to survive long enough to observe the environment. Anything rigid or filled with air will collapse. Any weak point will fail. Even the smallest imperfection can become catastrophic at depth. The deep ocean has no tolerance for design errors, but life in the trench doesn't rely on rigid structures. Instead of resisting pressure, deep-sea organisms embrace it. Their bodies aren't designed to fight against the push of the water, they're designed to match it. Many have no air pockets at all, no lungs, no gas-filled cavities, no rigid skeletons that could fracture or compress. Their softer bodies equalize the internal and external pressure automatically, because the water inside them matches the water around them. It's a strategy that works elegantly in these conditions, even if it would be impractical at the surface. This adaptation isn't just clever, it's necessary. Without it, the immense pressure would crush cells, collapse membranes, and damage proteins. Many deep-sea organisms have biochemistry that compensates for these effects. They produce molecules that stabilize cell structures against pressure-induced distortion. These compounds help proteins maintain their shape and allow membranes to stay flexible. Everything about their biology is calibrated for this environment. As we drift deeper into the trench's imagined descent, it becomes clear that pressure doesn't simply make life difficult, it changes what life can be. A fish shaped for the surface ocean won't survive here. Neither will most creatures adapted to the upper mesopelagic or even the bathypelagic zones. The deeper the trench becomes, the more finely tuned its inhabitants must be. They evolve slowly, shaped by the environment rather than shaping it. Their existence depends on remaining in balance with forces that would destroy most other organisms. Some deep-sea fish found near the trench have transparent skin. Others have bodies that look more like elongated ribbons than typical fish shapes. Some species appear inflated, though they contain no gas. Their tissues are simply filled with fluid that matches the density of seawater. Their muscles are soft. Their bones, if present, are weak and flexible. Everything feels adapted to bend rather than break. Strength in the deep sea doesn't come from resisting pressure. It comes from eliminating any reason for pressure to cause harm. There is a well-documented limit to how deep vertebrate fish can survive. Below a certain threshold, the pressure disrupts proteins involved in nerve signaling. The deepest fish ever recorded, snailfish found near the Mariana and Kermadec trenches, live close to 8,200 meters. Beyond that depth, vertebrate physiology seems to reach its practical boundary. The Tonga Trench contains similar species near its upper levels, but below certain depths, life becomes microbial or shifts into invertebrate forms that can handle far greater pressure. Microbial communities thrive at depth that would crush more complex organisms. They live inside the sediment, feeding on organic material deposited over time. Some microbes use chemicals released from the subducting plate. Others break down nutrients in the water itself. These organisms do not fear pressure, they require it. Their enzymes function best under extreme compression, and if brought to the surface they would lose structural stability and cease functioning properly. In a sense, these microbes are perfectly adapted to conditions that appear hostile from an outsider's perspective. For larger organisms, the challenge is not just surviving pressure, but functioning meaningfully within it. Moving in dense water at extreme depths requires effort. Every action must be efficient. Even swimming becomes different. Instead of rapid bursts of speed, many creatures move slowly. Their muscles are arranged in ways that conserve energy. They drift when they can, and swim only when necessary. Nothing is wasted. Some organisms rely on slow metabolic rates that match the environment's scarcity of energy. Pressure influences metabolism. The deeper the water, the slower biological processes become. Enzymes act more cautiously. Reactions take longer. Growth slows. Lifespans often extend well beyond what similar species experience in shallower waters. Slow life makes sense when every movement should count and every calorie must be used carefully. Pressure also changes how organisms feed. Since food is limited, many deep-sea creatures have large mouths relative to their bodies. They cannot afford to pass up a meal because opportunities are unpredictable. A fish might wait days for something edible to drift by. When it does, the fish must be able to consume it completely. The large jaws and expandable stomach serve as insurance. They also allow the organism to take advantage of whatever the environment offers, even if the prey is nearly as large as the predator. Other animals rely on scavenging. When a large carcass falls from shallower waters, perhaps a dead whale, tuna or shark, it becomes a feast for deep-sea organisms. Pressure doesn't prevent feeding, but it does influence how scavengers locate food. They don't rely on sight, they rely on chemical cues. The water carries faint traces of the decomposing organism, and scavengers detect those signals with extraordinary sensitivity. They move slowly toward the source, conserving energy until they find it. Once there, multiple species may gather around the carcass, each specializing in different parts of the remains. Some strip flesh, some consume bones, some feed on the microbes that bloom during decomposition. The cycle continues even under pressure that would crush most known life. Occasionally, sediment flows down the slopes of the trench, carrying nutrients or burying organisms that live along the walls. Pressure makes these events slower than on land. but they still shape the ecosystem. Creatures adapted to live in sediment must manage both pressure and shifting substrate. Many burrow. Some have bodies that allow them to slip through fine layers of particulate matter. Microbes rely on chemical gradients that shift when sediment moves, and they adjust their positions accordingly. As pressure grows with depth, the trench floor takes on characteristics that differ from the slopes above. The bottom is not a flat plane. It's a landscape shaped by millions of years of geological motion. Ridges rise from the sediment. Depressions form where material accumulates unevenly. The environment feels quiet, but it is always in motion. Even the smallest shifts in pressure or currents can alter the ecosystem over long periods. Organisms on the trench floor must deal with pressure that affects not only their bodies, but their surroundings. The water is so dense that any disturbance moves slowly but persists for longer. If something shifts in the sediment, the resulting cloud can hang suspended for hours before settling again. During that time, visibility, if the term applies at all, is reduced even further. Chemical cues may disperse more slowly or more widely, depending on how those particles move. Pressure does not simply push downward, it defines how the water behaves. Some invertebrates thrive under these conditions. Amphipods, for example, are common at extreme depths. They resemble small shrimp and live within sediment or among rocky structures. Their bodies are flexible and adapted to handle pressure without difficulty. They feed on organic matter, play a role in cleaning the seafloor, and serve as food for larger organisms when available. These amphipods are resilient in a way that surprises researchers. They have been collected from depths exceeding 10,000 meters and show no signs of stress when kept under pressure in specialized containers. Other invertebrates include sea cucumbers, which move slowly along the seafloor, ingesting sediment and extracting nutrients. Their soft bodies conform to the environment, and their feeding strategy fits the slow, steady pace of life here. Some sea cucumbers living near deep trenches have unusual shapes or adaptations that help them navigate steep or uneven terrain. They are simple creatures, but they play an important role in cycling nutrients. Throughout the trench region, pressure affects not only organisms but also physical processes. Chemical reactions take place more slowly, diffusion changes, even the properties of water shift slightly under extreme compression. Density increases, solubility of gases changes. The behavior of minerals and sediments becomes different from what we see in shallower environments. This means the rules governing geological and biological activity here don't always match surface logic. Yet everything must be understood within the context of pressure. Deep-sea research vessels and landers built for the trench must take pressure into account with extreme care. Instruments that work perfectly at 1,000 meters may fail at 8,000. Sensors must be enclosed in housings capable of withstanding crushing force. Cameras must be engineered to avoid collapse. Lights cannot rely on systems that weaken under pressure. Every detail matters. Scientists often spend years preparing equipment for a single descent, knowing that even small errors can lead to failure once the gear reaches the abyss. Despite the difficulty, each successful expedition reveals something new. Pressure-resistant cameras have filmed delicate organisms navigating the trench floor. Chemical sensors have measured gradients within the sediment. Robotic arms have collected samples from environments that seem almost impossible to reach. These discoveries continue to shape our understanding of how life functions under extreme conditions. Pressure also affects how organisms within the trench respond to threats. Predation, while slower and less dramatic than in shallower waters, still occurs. A predator sensing movement might take minutes to approach. A prey organism might glide slowly away, trying to avoid detection. Nothing happens suddenly. The environment does not support sudden movement. Water density is too high, and the energy costs are too great. Life here follows a measured rhythm, shaped by the weight of the ocean above it. As we continue this imagined descent toward the deepest regions of the Tonga Trench, the pressure becomes an ever-present character in the story. It's not a force that demands attention. It doesn't announce itself with noise or motion. It simply exists as a constant background presence, influencing every moment and every organism. It shapes bodies, behaviours, and ecosystems. It turns the trench into a place where only the most well-adapted creatures can survive. And as we drift deeper into this environment, pressure becomes not just a physical condition, but the foundation for everything that comes next. The deeper we go, the more the water, the sediment, the chemistry, and the life itself are defined by a world where the rules differ from anything at the surface. When you're ready, we'll continue through this environment at the same steady pace, following the faint signals and quiet movements that reveal how life manages to persist under conditions that seem unimaginable from the world above. As we keep drifting through this deep stretch of ocean, the pressure remains constant in its quiet insistence, and the darkness holds steady in every direction. But another feature of the trench begins to make itself known. Even in a world without sunlight, the water is not completely void of light. It is faint, subtle, and easy to miss if you imagine this place as silent emptiness. But down here, light comes not from above, but from the living things that carry it within them. The organisms that generate their own illumination create small points of brightness in an environment that would otherwise be entirely black, and these points aren't decorative or dramatic. They serve a purpose, and their presence tells us something about how life functions when the rules are different from what we're used to. If we were watching the water around us with an eye adapted to see the faintest possible glimmers, we would notice small pulses, short flickers, or soft glows that appear and disappear without pattern. Some of these glows come from creatures drifting without much intention. Others come from predators, waiting for something to swim close enough to investigate. Still others appear as a form of communication. The deeper the environment becomes, the more these small traces of light stand out against the black. They are not bright enough to illuminate the surroundings. They don't form beams or shapes. They are simply brief signals in a place where light barely exists at all. Bioluminescence is common throughout the deep sea, but its frequency and purpose shift with depth. In shallower areas where light still filters through, organisms use bioluminescence to attract prey or confuse predators. At mid-depths, it becomes a tool for camouflage, letting animals match the dim light from above. But as we move closer toward the trench, the patterns change again. Light becomes a rare form of currency. Every glow has meaning. Every flash serves a purpose. The organisms relying on it use it carefully because producing light requires energy, and energy is limited here. Some creatures generate light through chemical reactions within specialized organs. Others depend on symbiotic bacteria that reside within their tissues. The bacteria themselves produce the light, and the host organism regulates when and how it shines. This partnership benefits both sides. The bacteria receive a stable environment to live in, while the host gains a tool for communication or hunting. In shallower waters, such relationships are well documented. In the extreme depths near the Tonga Trench, they continue in modified forms, adapted to pressure and scarcity. The light we see in this environment is rarely colourful. Most bioluminescence is blue or green because those wavelengths travel best through water. Red light is absorbed quickly, so organisms using red glows would lose their signal within short distances. Blue and green light spread the farthest, even in these conditions, though they still fade rapidly. The glows are faint, not because the organisms are weak, but because brighter light would attract unnecessary attention. In the deep sea, being noticed is rarely an advantage. As we continue drifting through this section of water, imagine a small drifting organism about the size of a grain of rice. It emits a light so soft that it appears as a small dot suspended in the water. The glow is not constant. It pulses in intervals that serve as a signal to others of its kind, letting them remain aware of each other in a place where sight does not function in any traditional sense. These signals might help them coordinate movement or avoid drifting too far apart. Farther ahead, a predator watches from the shadows, though shadows may not be the right word since there is no external light to create them. Instead, the creature remains still, waiting for one of these glows to pass too close. When it does, the predator might flash its own pattern to confuse the prey or to draw it into range. Then, with a slow movement that fits the pace of deep-sea life, it takes advantage of the opportunity. Some species living near trench depths use bioluminescence as a lure. They have appendages or small organs that emit steady or rhythmic glows. Prey drawn to these lights approach slowly, attracted by what appears to be a harmless drifting organism. When they come close enough, the predator opens its jaws, which are often larger than expected for its body size, and consumes the prey in one movement. These predators don't chase. They can't afford to. They use light as an anchor, letting curiosity or instinct bring food to them. Other creatures use bioluminescence for defense. When threatened, they emit a sudden flash or cloud of glowing particles. This can distract a predator long enough for the organism to slip away. In the deep ocean, where movement is slow, a brief visual distraction can make a difference. The glowing cloud spreads through the water, lingering longer than the organism itself, leaving the predator searching the wrong area. In some cases, bioluminescence works as a form of self-advertisement to larger predators. While this might sound counterintuitive, certain deep-sea creatures emit light when attacked, signalling to bigger predators that a meal is nearby. If a larger predator comes to investigate, it may target the original attacker instead, giving the glowing creature a chance to escape. This strategy depends entirely on the idea that deep-sea predators respond to visual cues even in low-light environments, and many of them do. As we move deeper toward the trench, the number of glowing organisms begins to thin, but they never disappear completely. There are always creatures capable of producing light, even at depths close to the trench floor. These species tend to be smaller and more specialized than their mid-ocean counterparts. Their glows are shorter and more controlled. Their response times are slower, shaped by the pressure and cold that govern every part of their lives. One example that helps illustrate this adaptation is the deep-sea amphipod. While not all amphipods glow, some species found in trench environments emit faint light when disturbed. This defense mechanism may help them survive encounters with predators. Amphipods are important in deep ecosystems because they consume organic material that settles from above, breaking it down into nutrients used by other organisms. If amphipods relied only on their size or speed to survive, they wouldn't last long. Their ability to produce light, even weakly, plays a role in their survival strategy. Other deep-dwelling creatures, like certain species of comb jellies, use rows of cilia to create faint glowing patterns. These patterns shimmer along their transparent bodies, though the light isn't produced through bioluminescence in the strict sense. Instead, it results from the way their cilia scatter whatever faint ambient light might be present. In the trench environment, this effect is minimal, but comb jellies can also produce their own faint glows when necessary. These glows are subtle waves rather than distinct flashes, creating a visual effect that looks more like a shifting outline than a clear pattern. Predators don't ignore these lights. They depend on them. Since vision becomes less effective at extreme depths, any source of illumination becomes a potential source of energy. A creature that glows at the wrong time or too brightly risks attracting something larger and hungrier than itself. Because of this, many deep-sea organisms regulate their glowing organs with remarkable precision. They can produce light in short pulses, just long enough to serve their purpose without lingering. The trench environment adds another layer of complexity. Because the pressure is so high, the cellular structures responsible for producing light require adaptations that prevent damage. Proteins involved in bioluminescence must remain stable under compression. Chemical reactions that release photons must proceed efficiently, even when the surrounding conditions slow nearly everything else. The glow produced by deep-sea organisms isn't weaker because of pressure. It's carefully calibrated to fit the demands of this environment. Producing unnecessary light is wasteful, and the deep ocean does not reward waste. In some species, the light isn't used for communication or hunting at all. It serves as a byproduct of metabolic processes. These organisms release light accidentally during chemical reactions, though evolution often shapes these accidental glows into something functional over time. In areas close to hydrothermal or serpentinization-related chemical processes, faint light signals sometimes arise from bacteria colonizing the surrounding sediments. These glows might be invisible to most animals, but there are species capable of detecting them and using the information to navigate or locate resources. Because the trench is a place where the environment is so consistent, and because the pressure remains unchanging at its deepest points, organisms here evolve in highly specialized ways. Some creatures living near the Tonga Trench floor display bioluminescent features that allow them to identify members of their own species. Since visual recognition is limited, these glows function more like markers than images. A pattern of dots, a faint line along the body, or a brief sequence of pulses might tell another organism whether it's encountering a mate, a competitor, or something irrelevant. Bioluminescence also plays a role in how deep-sea organisms structure their movements. While many trench-dwelling animals move slowly, they still navigate their environment with intention. A faint glow helps orient them within an otherwise uniform black field. For some species, this glow may only be visible to themselves, reflected off nearby particles or surfaces in ways too subtle for predators to detect. The light becomes a private tool, not a broadcast signal. There are also organisms that avoid producing any light at all. For them, even faint bioluminescence is too risky. These species rely entirely on chemical cues or pressure-sensitive structures to navigate. But even in the presence of such non-luminous creatures, the deep sea is never entirely dark. Somewhere nearby, another organism produces a brief pulse or glow, reminding us that the darkness is shared with life that has found ways to make its presence known. As we continue imagining ourselves drifting deeper toward the trench, the glowing organisms become occasional companions rather than frequent ones. They appear here and there, not in clusters but individually, each one maintaining its own rhythm or pattern. They create an impression of scattered points of light suspended across vast distances. These points don't illuminate the environment, but they give the deep ocean a distinctive texture that exists only because life has adapted to darkness in such intricate ways. If we were to follow one of these glowing organisms, we would see how its light changes based on its behavior. A drifting organism might pulse more slowly when at rest, then increase its frequency when sensing movement nearby. A predator might hold its glow steady to attract attention, or it may extinguish it entirely while tracking chemical cues. These choices aren't conscious in any human sense, but they are forms of behavior optimally shaped by survival. Even microbial life participates in these faint displays. Some bacteria emit continuous soft light as a byproduct of reactions associated with energy production. This faint glow is usually undetectable except at extremely close range. But for organisms living in the trench's immediate surroundings, even tiny sources of illumination can have meaning. In a place where every sensory cue matters, a microbe's byproduct becomes part of the ecosystem's information exchange. As we drift further, the brightness of the occasional bioluminescent pulse begins to stand out more against the uniform environment. Pressure remains steady. The cold remains unchanging. But the glows, faint as they are, break the monotony of darkness and create moments of activity in a world that moves at a slow, careful pace. These glows aren't grand displays, they are functional signals in a place where efficiency and survival shape every detail. The deeper we move, the more the glowing organisms feel like brief visitors rather than constant companions. They pass by with measured movements, conserving energy. They appear and disappear in slow patterns. None seem in a hurry. The trench environment does not rush anything. Even the glows reflect that. They're measured, controlled, and used with intention. This slow pace matches the rest of the deep sea, where every action is deliberate because nothing here replenishes itself quickly. As this imagined descent continues, we begin to see how the faint lights of these organisms help define the experience of moving through such depth. Without them, the darkness would feel uniform. With them, it becomes an environment shaped not just by absence but by small, purposeful signals. These signals help creatures navigate, feed, communicate, and survive. They create a rhythm in a place without sunlight, and while the lights we see come from individual organisms, they collectively reveal something larger about life in the trench. They show that even in one of the harshest environments on Earth, life adapts not just by reducing functions but by creating new ones. Bioluminescence becomes a tool for survival, a mechanism for communication, and a bridge between organisms that exist without visibility. As we keep moving through this deep stretch of the Pacific, the glowing signals from earlier become less frequent, and the darkness settles back into its steady presence. The pressure remains constant, the cold stays unchanging, and the silence feels familiar in a way that makes it easy to imagine remaining here longer than expected. But this part of the descent brings us to another group of creatures that shape the trench environment in subtle, persistent ways. These are the organisms that drift instead of swim, that wander without a clear destination, and that occupy the deep ocean not by travelling fast or covering great distances, but simply by existing exactly where the water carries them. When we imagine deep-sea creatures, it is easy to picture predators with oversized jaws or luminous lures, but much of the life in and around the trench is made up of organisms that don't rely on speed, strength, or complex behaviour. They rely on buoyancy, slow metabolism, and patience. Their movement is guided less by choice and more by the gentle pull of currents, gravity, and density. Down here, drifting is not a sign of weakness. It's an effective strategy shaped by a world where energy is rare and backgrounds never change quickly. Some of the first wanderers we meet in this stretch of ocean are gelatinous organisms that resemble ribbons or soft sheets, rather than defined bodies. They aren't helpless, but their movement is minimal. A gentle undulation of their tissues carries them forward. The motion is almost too slow to notice. They do not charge toward anything. They simply move enough to reposition themselves when the environment requires it. These organisms use their gelatinous bodies to manage buoyancy. Their tissues match the density of seawater closely, allowing them to suspend themselves without effort. If they need to rise or sink, small adjustments in internal fluid composition are enough. They don't fight the environment, they work with it, letting the water's natural motion guide their path. Nearby, other drifters appear with even simpler structures. Some lack clear heads or tails. Their bodies resemble soft cylinders with thin membranes trailing behind them. These membranes catch microscopic particles in the water, functioning as feeding structures. They don't need to chase prey. Instead, they filter tiny bits of organic matter that drift past, relying on currents to bring food rather than spending energy to find it. These drifting lifestyles might seem passive, but in the deep ocean, passivity can be efficient. Here, energy conservation is one of the most important survival strategies. Any attempt at rapid movement or active hunting would require energy that the environment cannot consistently provide. So instead, these creatures settle into a rhythm defined by stillness and slow repositioning. Among them are the larvaceans, small tadpole-like organisms that construct delicate mucus structures known as houses. These houses act as filtration systems, capturing small particles from the water. As the house becomes clogged, the larvacean abandons it and builds a new one, a process that occurs repeatedly throughout its life. These discarded houses sink to the seafloor, adding to the deep ocean's supply of organic matter. Even though each individual larvacean is tiny, their combined activity contributes significantly to how nutrients cycle through the deep. As we continue through this imagined descent, larger wanderers begin to appear. Some are known as deep-sea holothurians or sea cucumbers. While they share their name with familiar shallow water species, the ones living near the trench behave slightly differently. Their bodies are still soft and elongated, but they develop shapes that help them stabilize on uneven terrain or drift above the seafloor without losing control. Many of them use slow undulations or slight fin movements to rise just above the sediment, letting currents move them short distances before they settle back down to feed. These organisms do not rush. Their feeding strategy is deliberate. They consume sediment, extract the organic material within, and leave behind cleaned particles. In doing so, they help recycle nutrients and keep the trench ecosystem functioning. Even though their movement seems minimal, it plays a significant role in shaping the sediment landscape. Mixed among them are the xenophyophores, some of the largest single-celled organisms on Earth. These beings form intricate structures using particles from the surrounding sediment, creating shapes that resemble sponges or branching trees. They anchor themselves to the seafloor or cling to slopes, and although they move far less than the drifting creatures around them, they still count among the wanderers in a broader sense. Their structures trap organic material, creating small microhabitats that support other organisms. Despite being individual cells, they influence the trench environment in ways disproportionate to their simplicity. A little farther along, another type of drifter emerges. These are the gelatinous zooplankton that resemble transparent bells or domes. They pulse their bodies gently to move, though the movement doesn't create speed. It simply helps them maintain a steady position or drift in a controlled direction. Inside their transparent forms, organs appear faintly outlined, a result of bodies designed to minimize visibility. Even without predators that rely heavily on sight, being transparent is useful because it reduces the chance of standing out against the darkness. These gelatinous wanderers play important roles in transporting nutrients across depths. They feed at one level, drift to another, and release waste that sinks toward the sea floor. In a place where nutrients are limited, even small contributions matter. Over time, these organisms become part of the quiet machinery that keeps the trench environment functioning. Among the deeper drifters are the siphonophores, long colonial organisms composed of many specialized parts. Each colony behaves as a single entity, with sections responsible for feeding, reproduction, or propulsion. Some siphonophores stretch for several meters, though they appear delicate and almost insubstantial. Their bodies form chains that drift through the water, sometimes moving as slow waves ripple along their length. These chains are finely balanced. A disturbance in one section can trigger slight adjustments across the entire structure. They can reposition themselves, shift their orientation, or expand feeding structures that resemble nets. These nets capture tiny organisms drifting in the water, and the siphonophores' individual units process the food collectively. It's a communal system, efficient and suited to the deep ocean's pace. The siphonophores that appear near trench regions are usually smaller than the massive ones found in shallower waters. Pressure limits how large certain gas-filled structures can become, but even at reduced size, they maintain their drifting behavior, using minimal movement to survive in a world where slow precision is the norm. Sometimes these drifters encounter unpredictable changes. A sudden shift in current might carry a group of small zooplankton upward or downward. A sediment cloud stirred by a landslide on the trench wall might envelop drifting organisms, forcing them to reposition. These events are rare on short timescales, but consistent over geological periods. Drift patterns change, movements adjust, the organisms continue adapting to whatever the water brings. One of the more intriguing wanderers near these depths is the deep-sea medusa, a jellyfish-like organism that drifts rather than actively swims. These medusa have soft bell-shaped bodies with long trailing tentacles. Their tentacles extend far below the bell, capturing prey that drifts into contact. The medusae pulse their bells slowly, enough to keep themselves stable, but not enough to create fast movement. Their lives follow the water's guidance more than their own decisions. These creatures feed on small animals, detritus, or other drifting organisms. When they encounter a source of food, they respond with a slight tightening of their tentacles, pulling the prey toward their bell for digestion. Their behaviour fits the rhythm of the deep ocean, where opportunities arise infrequently but must be taken without hesitation. We occasionally come across animals that drift temporarily before settling on the sea floor. Some larvae of deep-sea species begin life in shallower waters, drifting downward as they grow. They ride currents until they reach depths suitable for adulthood. During this period, they behave like drifters, absorbing nutrients from the water or capturing microscopic prey. Once they reach the appropriate depth, they settle into crevices, burrow into sediment, or attach themselves to surfaces. This drift period is essential for many species. It allows larvae to disperse over large areas despite the slow pace of adult life. In the deep ocean, spreading offspring across a wide region increases the likelihood that some will find suitable habitats. The drifting phase becomes a natural dispersal mechanism, powered not by the organism's strength, but by the ocean's slow, steady movement. As we imagine ourselves travelling further into this environment, the idea of drifting begins to feel less passive and more purposeful. Every drifter has a role in the trench ecosystem. Some transport nutrients, some recycle sediment, some serve as prey, others act as filters or feeders that maintain the balance of life at depth. Their slow wandering becomes part of a network of interactions that keep the ecosystem functioning. Even the way these organisms respond to pressure reflects their drifting nature. Many have bodies that deform slightly under changing conditions. Their gelatinous tissues compress without damage. Their internal fluids distribute force evenly. This flexibility allows them to move vertically within narrow bands of the trench without suffering harm. A shift of a few hundred meters might not seem significant at shallower depths, but down here, such a shift involves substantial changes in pressure. Only organisms designed for drifting can manage these transitions smoothly. In this part of the descent, we also encounter planktonic organisms that drift through all levels of the ocean, but become particularly slow-moving at greater depths. These include radiolarians, small organisms with intricate silica skeletons. Their skeletons form geometric shapes that look more like architecture than biology. They drift in slow spirals, their tiny spines catching currents. Though individually small, they contribute to sediment production when they die and sink to the seafloor, their silica structures accumulating over thousands of years. Other microscopic drifters include foraminifera, single-celled organisms with shells made of calcium carbonate. They live both near the seafloor and drifting in the water column. Their shells, once abandoned, form a significant part of ocean sediment. This sediment accumulates layer by layer, recording the history of the ocean in fine detail. Even though each foraminifera is tiny, their combined contribution forms geological records used by scientists to study past climates and environmental conditions. As we drift deeper into the trench environment itself, the abundance of drifters changes, but they never disappear entirely. The trench walls and floor still host drifting organisms that pass through in slow cycles, carried by currents that move horizontally and vertically. Some will settle, some will continue drifting until they reach areas where food becomes more accessible. Some will never reach the trench floor, remaining suspended in the water column throughout their lives. The drifters and wanderers define much of what the deep ocean is. Without them, the trench would rely solely on occasional carcasses and limited microbial activity for nutrients. Instead, these creatures form a bridge between shallower and deeper layers, transporting organic matter downward in slow, consistent patterns. They ensure that even in a place with little direct energy, life continues. Their wandering creates pathways for nutrients, their drifting distributes resources, and their quiet presence contributes to the balance that defines trench ecosystems. They aren't dramatic or visually striking. They don't chase prey or fight for territory. But their role is essential, and their movement shows how life adapts to environments that don't favour speed or activity. As we continue our slow descent toward the deeper layers of the trench, these drifting organisms fade into the background, but not because they disappear. Instead, they become part of the constant presence that defines the deep ocean. They drift above us, below us, and around us, contributing quietly to a world that thrives under pressure and darkness. As we drift deeper into this part of the ocean, the quiet presence of the drifters begins to fade behind us, and the water ahead grows noticeably emptier. Not empty in a literal sense, because particles, microbes and soft-bodied wanderers still move around us, but empty in a way that feels different from what we've passed through already. In this stretch of the descent, the organisms we encounter are fewer, larger in proportion to their surroundings, and shaped by a life spent waiting for opportunities rather than chasing them. Most days, nothing happens here, but when something does, it matters. This part of the deep is home to creatures designed for scarcity, endurance, and quiet confrontation. Their adaptations look dramatic to us, but they are simply practical responses to an environment where chance encounters determine survival. The first of these creatures appears slowly, lingering at the edge of perception. A faint outline, a soft ripple through the water, a shape that doesn't match the drifting organisms we passed earlier. Predators in the deep rarely move fast. Speed wastes energy. Instead, they wait. They hold their position, suspended in near motionless water. When something edible drifts by, they act with precision shaped by millions of years of living in a world without reliable food. One such creature is a deep-sea fish that barely resembles the forms we associate with fish at the surface. Its body is soft and elongated, shaped to move efficiently without much muscle mass. Its head appears oversized, with a mouth that opens wider than the rest of its body suggests. This disproportionate structure isn't an accident. Down here, food availability is unpredictable, so the ability to consume prey of nearly any size becomes a valuable adaptation. When prey drifts close enough, the fish opens its jaws, creating a sudden vacuum that pulls in water and anything within reach. Its teeth are thin and curved, positioned to prevent escape rather than tear flesh. They're more like holding hooks than cutting tools. These teeth ensure that whatever enters the mouth cannot leave, even if it's too large to swallow immediately. The fish will work the prey deeper into its mouth over time, using slow muscle contractions until it reaches the stomach. Nothing about the process is hurried. Everything proceeds at a measured pace. Nearby, another predator drifts, this one with a body that seems almost too delicate to belong in such an extreme environment. Its skin is thin and translucent, revealing organs and muscle threads arranged to maximize efficiency. Along its lower jaw are rows of small, sharp teeth, each one positioned to guide prey inward. These teeth aren't designed for biting through tough material. They're designed to catch soft-bodied organisms, keep them in place, and allow slow consumption. Many prey species in the trench are gelatinous or lightly structured, making this feeding method effective. As we watch these creatures in our imagination, their movements feel almost unhurried. They wait, they sense, they respond. In the deep ocean, hunting rarely involves chase. It involves being in the right place at the right time and having the right tools to capitalize on that moment. Tentacled creatures also inhabit this region. They don't resemble the cephalopods familiar from shallower waters. These deep-dwelling relatives have elongated arms that drift with the currents, and their bodies are shaped to maintain a stable orientation in the water. Their tentacles are lined with sensory structures rather than strong suction cups. These sensors detect faint pressure changes or traces of organic chemicals drifting on slow currents. When prey brushes against a tentacle, the reaction is not a rapid strike but a slow tightening. The tentacle coils with steady pressure, pulling the prey closer to the body where it can be consumed. These creatures don't rely on quick reflexes. They rely on precision and certainty. A loose grip could mean losing a meal that might not be replaced for days. Other tentacled animals in this region resemble long, ribbon-like forms that trail behind the main body. They don't hunt actively, but they create extended surfaces that intercept passing prey. Tiny organisms that drift into these extended structures become trapped by mucus coatings or fine spines. The creature then reels in the captured prey using slow contractions. This method allows the organism to gather food without spending extra energy searching for it. Some predators combine both teeth and tentacles. These hybrid strategies emerge in environments where specialization must be balanced with versatility. A species might have a mouth lined with backward-facing teeth and several tentacles used for gathering prey. The tentacles bring the prey close, and the teeth ensure it cannot escape once inside the mouth. It's a system optimized for environments where opportunities are limited. In some cases, these predators rely on tentacles not only for feeding, but also for sensing their surroundings. Since light is nearly non-existent at these depths, vision becomes less useful. Instead, sensory organs along tentacles detect chemical gradients, pressure shifts, and vibrations. These cues allow the predator to recognize the presence of nearby organisms even without direct contact. Tentacles serve as extended sensory fields, reaching far beyond the creature's body and giving it a chance to detect prey or predators early. When we picture these creatures, it's tempting to imagine them as aggressive or threatening, because their adaptations seem extreme. But in reality, their behavior is shaped by efficiency rather than aggression. They don't waste energy attacking unless they have clear reason to. Most remain still, conserving energy until the right moment arrives. One particularly notable creature in this depth range is the deep-sea chimera relative, though the trench versions differ from the more familiar forms. They have elongated bodies, reduced eyes, and sensory organs arranged along their snouts. These organs detect electrical fields produced by living organisms. In an environment without light, electrical sensing becomes a valuable way to locate prey. The creature moves slowly, its fins extending to keep it balanced. When it detects a faint electrical pulse from a drifting organism, it adjusts its position, aiming its mouth toward the signal. Once close enough, it opens its jaws and uses its teeth to secure the prey. Even in the most extreme depths, crustaceans maintain a presence. Some have claws adapted for grasping rather than crushing. Their claws are long and thin, designed to close gently around soft-bodied prey. Their antennae stretch out ahead of them, probing the water. These sensory structures detect minute vibrations. When the crustacean senses something edible, it moves toward it with a slow sideways glide. Once close enough, it extends its claws, captures the prey, and brings it toward its mouth. Some crustaceans in this region rely on scavenging instead of hunting. They crawl along the seafloor using their claws to sift through sediment for anything edible. Their survival depends on their ability to detect chemical traces left behind by decomposing material. When they encounter a carcass, they gather in small numbers, feeding slowly. The carcass may last for days or weeks, depending on its size. During this time, the crustaceans feed until only bones or tougher materials remain. Other scavengers include larger invertebrates adapted to handle pressure. Their bodies are sturdy yet flexible, and their limbs are arranged to maximize stability on the uneven seafloor. Their mandibles crush or scrape whatever remains of the carcass after other scavengers have fed. These organisms play an important role in recycling nutrients. Without them, organic material would accumulate at the seafloor without being processed efficiently. Further along this imagined descent, the predators become less frequent, but those that remain show even more specialized adaptations. One such creature resembles an elongated eel, though its body is softer than those found in shallower waters. It hunts by hiding within depressions or between rocks. Its body blends with the environment, and its sharp teeth remain concealed until prey drifts close. When the prey arrives, the eel-like creature lashes out with sudden precision. The movement is fast compared to the slow pace of the deep, but not fast by shallow ocean standards. In this world, speed is relative. A quick movement at depth feels dramatic because nothing else around it moves in that manner. Some predators rely on suction rather than biting. Their mouths form circular openings lined with small spines. When prey drifts close, the predator expands its oral cavity, creating suction strong enough to draw in water and any organism caught within. The prey becomes trapped by the spines and gradually pulled deeper into the digestive tract. This method allows the predator to capture organisms of various shapes and sizes. Another group of hunters includes deep-sea worms with extendable feeding structures. These structures remain hidden until needed. When prey approaches, the worm extends its proboscis rapidly, latching onto the organism and pulling it toward its mouth. The proboscis retracts slowly, conserving energy for the next opportunity. These worms inhabit crevices or burrow within sediment, lying in wait for passing prey. Some trench creatures aren't predators in the traditional sense, but still use tentacles or teeth-like structures for feeding. These include filter feeders that extend long tentacles upward, catching particles or small organisms drifting through the water. They don't chase prey. They create feeding surfaces that maximize contact with the surrounding environment. Their tentacles are flexible and can retract slowly when disturbed. This strategy works well in areas where currents bring a steady supply of microscopic food. As we imagine descending deeper, the variety of tentacled organisms becomes more apparent. Some use tentacles like nets, some like arms, some like sensory feelers. Each adaptation reflects a different response to the same challenges: darkness, pressure, and scarcity. Tentacles extend a creature's reach without requiring movement. Teeth secure food quickly with minimal effort. Together they form a toolkit that suits the pace of life near the trench. One creature in this area possesses both glowing lures and tentacles. It emits faint bioluminescent signals to attract prey. When a smaller organism approaches the glow, the creature extends its tentacles to capture it. The tentacles bring the prey close to the mouth, where rows of small teeth prevent escape. This method blends sensory signaling with physical capture in a way that maximizes efficiency. Another predator relies entirely on ambush. It buries itself partially in the sediment, leaving only its sensory organs exposed. These organs detect the vibration of nearby organisms. When prey moves overhead, the predator launches upward, grabbing it with tentacles and securing it with teeth. After feeding, the predator slowly burrows back into the sediment, waiting for the next opportunity. Throughout this region, survival depends not on dominance but on patience. Each creature has evolved to take advantage of rare moments. Teeth, tentacles, and specialized jaws are tools shaped by necessity. They aren't symbols of aggression. They're solutions to the problem of living in an environment that offers little certainty. As we drift through this world, these creatures appear and disappear at irregular intervals. Some remain suspended in the water, waiting for prey to drift nearby. Others anchor themselves to rocks or sediment. Some move vertically, shifting through layers of the water column to find different prey sources. Despite the scarcity, life continues. Each organism in its own way contributes to the balance that allows the trench ecosystem to function. The deeper we go, the more these predators and scavengers become part of the backdrop rather than isolated encounters. Their presence feels steady. They belong here not because they dominate the environment, but because they're tailored to it. Their adaptations reflect the demands of a world where every movement matters. As we continue drifting downward through the deep Pacific, the predators with teeth and tentacles begin to fade behind us, slipping back into the darkness where they wait for the next rare moment that brings food within reach. The water around us grows quieter, not because anything here makes noise, but because the larger movements of life become increasingly sparse. We have reached a part of the descent where size shrinks dramatically. Down here, survival depends not on jaws or arms, but on the ability to function at scales that seem almost invisible. The deeper we go, the more the ocean becomes shaped by organisms so small that they disappear into the water unless we place our focus directly on them. Their bodies are tiny, their structures simple, and their presence constant. This is where microbes define the ecosystem, and where much of the trench's life begins. At these depths, the trench environment shifts from the patterns we recognise towards something more subtle. The water remains cold, near freezing. The pressure continues to grow with each metre, becoming an unchanging condition that shapes every detail of life. Without sunlight, without currents strong enough to create dramatic shifts, and without abundant sources of food, the organisms living here depend on strategies that have evolved over millions of years. These strategies are not dramatic, but they are effective. Microbial life has adapted not just to survive under pressure, but to thrive, using resources that would be insufficient for larger organisms. Microbes appear everywhere in the ocean, from the surface all the way down to the deepest points. But the microbes found in trench environments are different. They have adapted to pressures that would disrupt the internal chemistry of most surface microorganisms. At more than 1,000 atmospheres, the bonds that hold proteins together begin to deform. Membranes lose stability. Chemical reactions slow. But the microbes here have evolved solutions to each of these challenges. Instead of rigid membranes, they use flexible ones that resist cracking under pressure. Their proteins remain stable because they produce molecules that reinforce these structures without limiting their function. Their enzymes continue working even under compression that would halt biochemical activity in most other cells. Some of the most abundant microbes in the trench sediment are piezophils, organisms that not only tolerate pressure but require it. If brought to the surface, these microbes would lose structural integrity, and many would not survive. Their entire internal environment depends on the weight pressing down from above. They are shaped by it, balanced by it, and stabilized by it. Pressure is not a threat to them, it is a requirement for their biochemistry. As we drift farther down, the trench floor begins to emerge in our imagination. It is uneven and layered with fine sediment that has accumulated over millions of years. This sediment contains organic material from the upper ocean, fragments of dead organisms, and chemical deposits produced by geological activity. The microbial communities living here rely on this material. They do not need large food sources. They consume nutrients at the molecular level, breaking down compounds that drift through the water or settle to the seafloor. Within the sediment, microbial mat structures form, though they are invisible at a distance. These mats are dense clusters of bacteria that concentrate near chemical gradients. When a compound useful for metabolism becomes available, microbes gather around it. In some places, these gradients form because of reactions between seawater and minerals. In others, they arise from the slow decomposition of organic material buried in the sediment. Microbes respond to these gradients in ways that larger organisms never could. They migrate through the sediment in small numbers, replicate near food sources, and form layers that alter the chemical balance of the environment. These microbial communities do not rely on sunlight, so they cannot use photosynthesis. Instead, they use chemosynthesis. This process draws energy from chemical reactions, oxidizing methane, reducing sulfur compounds, or converting hydrogen into usable energy. Chemosynthesis allows life to flourish even in complete darkness. This process serves as the foundation for many deep-sea ecosystems. Microbes harness energy directly from the Earth's chemistry, and organisms higher up the food chain rely on them indirectly for survival. The sediment contains microhabitats where oxygen levels vary. Oxygen becomes scarce quickly in deep sediments because microbes consume it during metabolic processes. As oxygen decreases, different species take over. Some use nitrate instead of oxygen, others use sulfate. Still others rely on metals or unusual compounds. Each species occupies a niche defined by the chemistry of the sediment. These niches form layers that shift slowly as the sediment ages. The trench floor also receives occasional large inputs of organic matter, such as the remains of whales, sharks, or large fish. When a carcass sinks to the depths, microbial communities respond quickly. Bacteria colonize the surface, breaking down tissues and releasing compounds that attract scavengers. Deeper within the carcass, anaerobic microbes begin processing fats, proteins, and bones. These processes release methane and other gases, which then feed additional communities of bacteria that use chemical gradients as energy sources. The decomposition process may last for months or even years. When the carcass finally disintegrates, it leaves behind nutrient-rich sediment that supports microbial growth for generations. Some trench microbes are adapted to live inside the guts or surfaces of larger organisms. Amphipods, holothurians, and other deep-sea creatures carry microbial communities with them. These microbes help digest food, break down chemicals, or protect the host from harmful bacteria. The relationship is mutually beneficial. The larger organism receives metabolic support, while the microbes gain access to nutrients and stable environments. These partnerships may seem simple, but they play important roles in the deep-sea ecosystem. Even within the water column above the trench, microbes float freely in enormous numbers. They drift with currents, attach themselves to tiny particles, or form small aggregates. These aggregates, sometimes called marine snow particles, become microhabitats for diverse microbial communities. As the particles drift downward, microbes consume the organic material, converting it into energy. This process slows the downward drift of nutrients and ensures that the trench ecosystem receives a steady supply of material. Without these microbes, the trench would be far less productive. Bacterial films also form on the surfaces of rocks and minerals along the trench walls. These films look invisible from a distance, but under magnification, they reveal complex structures. Bacteria attach themselves to rock surfaces, forming layers that protect them from shifting currents. They excrete substances that help them adhere to the rock, and these substances can accumulate over time. The bacterial films become biofilms, structured communities that allow microbes to communicate using chemical signals. These signals coordinate growth, reproduction, and metabolism, allowing the community to adapt collectively to changes in chemical conditions. Some microbes form spores or cysts that allow them to survive long periods without nutrients. When conditions improve, they become active again. These survival strategies allow microbial communities to endure periods when organic matter is scarce. Since the trench environment depends on nutrient pulses, the ability to remain dormant helps microbes survive the long intervals between major events. In addition to bacteria, archaea play a significant role in trench ecosystems. Archaea are microorganisms distinct from bacteria, with different cell structures and metabolic pathways. Many archaea are extremophils, capable of surviving conditions lethal to most organisms. In the trench, they thrive in deep sediment layers where oxygen is absent. Some archaea produce methane as a metabolic byproduct. Others oxidize methane, converting it into energy. This methane cycle forms an important part of the trench's biochemical system, keeping chemical levels stable and supporting other organisms. Archaea also inhabit the guts of deep-sea animals, helping them break down complex compounds. Some archaea form symbiotic relationships with bacteria, sharing metabolic products to complete chemical reactions that neither could perform alone. These interactions demonstrate how interconnected life becomes at microscopic scales. The deeper we imagine ourselves drifting, the more we see how microbes shape everything around them. They process nutrients, control chemical gradients, create soil-like sediment layers, and support larger organisms. Their presence defines the trench ecosystem even more than the predators above. Without microbes, nothing else living in the trench would survive. One of the most fascinating aspects of trench microbes is their diversity. Even within a small sample of sediment, thousands of microbial species may exist, each adapted to specific conditions. Some thrive in layers where oxygen is available. Others live deeper, where nutrients are more limited. Some depend on metals such as iron or manganese. Others rely on sulfur or methane. These differences create a mosaic of life that covers the trench floor from top to bottom. Recent research has revealed microbes capable of breaking down plastic and other pollutants, even at extreme depths. This discovery shows how adaptable microbial life can be, These microbes do not need to evolve specifically for plastic decomposition. Their existing enzymes simply allow them to use foreign materials as energy sources. This ability suggests that trench microbes may help reduce human pollution, though the full impact is still being studied. Another surprising discovery involves microbial communities that live within rock pores along the trench. These microbes survive in cavities small enough to be invisible without magnification. They endure pressure, lack of nutrients, and limited space. Their ability to metabolize minerals allows them to survive where almost nothing else can. These rock-dwelling microbes contribute to chemical cycles that influence the trench's long-term stability. The microbial world below the trench also includes viruses. These viruses infect bacteria and archaea, playing a role in controlling population sizes. When viruses replicate, they release nutrients back into the environment as their hosts break down. This process helps maintain balance and ensures that no single microbial species becomes dominant. Viral interactions may seem destructive, but they contribute to nutrient cycling and ecosystem stability. As we continue drifting through this environment, it becomes clear that microbes define the deep ocean not through dramatic appearances, but through constant presence. They carry out the chemical reactions that support all other life. They break down organic material, produce nutrients, and maintain environmental balance. They survive conditions that would seem impossible elsewhere. Their resilience demonstrates how adaptable life becomes when given enough time to evolve. The deeper we move, the more the trench becomes a world shaped not by movement or light, but by chemical reactions and slow processes. Microbial life does not create sudden changes. It builds stability over long time scales. The trench becomes a place where every particle, every chemical gradient, and every fragment of organic matter supports life at a microscopic level. Even though we cannot see these microbes without tools, their influence becomes obvious when imagining the trench environment as a whole. They create the base of the food web, they control the chemical balance, they facilitate nutrient transfer. Without them, the larger creatures above would have nothing to feed on, and the trench would be nearly barren. As we drift slowly across the sediment in our minds, the microbial world continues its quiet work beneath us, reshaping the environment molecule by molecule. The trench floor becomes a living system built from countless tiny processes. Even the stillness is deceptive. These invisible organisms are constantly interacting with the environment, each contributing to the stability that defines the deepest parts of the ocean. Whenever you're ready to continue sinking into the next layer of this world, we'll move toward the ancient species that have survived here for millions of years, revealing how time shapes life in places where change arrives slowly and survival becomes a long-term strategy. As we continue drifting downward through this last stretch of deep Pacific water, the microbial world that filled the sediment beneath us fades into something quieter, not because those organisms disappear, but because the scale of life begins to shift again. We start encountering creatures that are not new arrivals to the planet's history, but remnants of far older oceans, species whose ancestors swam, crawled, burrowed, or drifted long before the continents settled into their current shapes. They endure in the trench not because they've been left behind by evolution, but because they've become so well matched to stable, unchanging conditions that the rest of the world has evolved around them while they simply continued their slow existence at depth. These organisms aren't primitive, they're persistent. They represent survival strategies that have never needed to change. The trench environment is one of the most consistent habitats on Earth. Temperature remains nearly constant, light never appears, pressure never fluctuates, currents move slowly, geological shifts take place on timescales far beyond the lifespan of any individual creature. This long-term stability creates a world where evolution moves at a different pace than at the surface. While surface species adapt to changing climates, shifting coastlines, or evolving predators, many deep-sea organisms maintain adaptations that originated millions of years ago. Over time, this creates a population of survivors, species whose basic body plans resemble ancient fossils more than the living creatures found near sunlight. One example appears in the form of certain deep-sea amphipods. Amphipods as a group are ancient, and the trench-dwelling varieties show features similar to lineages that existed tens of millions of years ago. Their bodies are elongated and segmented, their limbs adapted for scavenging rather than hunting. They lack the bright colours or complex visual markings common in shallow water crustaceans, because in this darkness, visual signals have no meaning. Instead, their sensory organs detect chemical traces and small vibrations. The overall shape of the amphipod has changed very little because it continues to work. Pressure-resistant exoskeletons, efficient scavenging habits, and flexible limbs allow these organisms to survive conditions that eliminate many other forms of life. They're not relics in the sense of being outdated, they're refined forms of ancient strategies that have proven useful in deep environments for millions of years. Nearby, we encounter deep-sea holothurians that also reflect ancient ocean life. Sea cucumbers in general have existed for more than 400 million years, and their trench-dwelling relatives maintain body plans that resemble early fossil records. These creatures move slowly along the sea floor using soft tube feet arranged along their bodies. Their movements are deliberate, shaped by the need to conserve energy. They ingest sediment, extract organic material, and release cleaned particles behind them. This feeding method has persisted since long before mammals existed on land, long before flowering plants evolved, and long before the continents arranged themselves into the familiar forms we see today. Because these environments change so slowly, the organisms that inhabit them experience different selective pressures than surface species. They don't need to adapt rapidly to new predators or environmental shifts. Instead, they focus on stability. Their bodies remain soft to handle high pressure. Their metabolisms remain slow to match low food availability. Their life cycles extend over long periods, allowing reproduction at a pace suited to an environment where survival is measured in years or decades instead of seasons. Some of the most fascinating survivors in trench ecosystems are these xenophyophores, large single-celled organisms that resemble sponges or branching structures. These organisms build intricate shells from sediment particles, creating shapes that support small communities of other species. Some xenophyophores grow to sizes that seem unbelievable for single-celled life, forming structures more than 10 centimeters across. Their fossils appear in ancient sediment deposits dating back tens of millions of years, indicating that their basic form has remained stable for long stretches of time. Their success lies in their ability to filter nutrients efficiently and survive under extreme pressure. They move slowly or not at all, but their presence shapes the physical environment of the trench floor, providing small habitats for other creatures. In addition to these stationary organisms, some drifting species carry ancient traits as well. Certain gelatinous zooplankton reflect lineages far older than many modern fish families. Their simple bodies require fewer changes over evolutionary time. As long as the environment stays consistent, their structures remain effective. Some jellyfish-like organisms today are nearly indistinguishable from fossil forms that drifted through prehistoric oceans. Pressure, darkness, and scarcity have not rendered these creatures obsolete. They've made them durable. Other ancient survivors include species of polychaete worms that inhabit burrows or tubes within the sediment. These worms display features similar to fossils from long-extinct ocean environments. Their bristles, feeding methods, and segmented bodies show clear ancestral patterns. They feed on organic matter using strategies that haven't needed significant changes over time. The trench environment rewards patience and consistent adaptation more than innovation. For these worms, the absence of predators and the stability of chemical conditions mean their ancient strategies continue to serve them well. As we drift further along the trench floor in our imagination, we encounter small, armoured creatures that bear resemblance to ancient arthropods. These creatures have hardened exoskeletons and simple, jointed limbs. Their ancestors survived mass extinctions, shifting climates, and continental rearrangements. Today, many appear only in deep environments where pressure and darkness protect them from competition with more rapidly evolving species. They scavenge or filter feed, depending on available resources. Their hardy structures help them withstand pressing forces and allow them to thrive on limited energy supplies. Some deep-dwelling fish species also reflect ancient ocean life. While the deepest vertebrates do not surpass the physiological limit around 8,200 meters, those living just above these depths exhibit features that resemble early fish lineages. Simplified skeletons, reduced eyesight, and gelatinous tissues indicate a step away from the traits found in modern shallow water fish. Their survival reflects an ancient pattern: soft bodies that compress under pressure, reduced energy use, and reliance on chemical cues rather than visual ones. Though they belong fully to the modern world, their bodies carry echoes of ancestral designs. Another group of organisms that persist in the trench are the small, shelled foraminifera. Their shells form sedimentary layers found in ocean rocks that date back hundreds of millions of years. These shells record environmental changes across epochs, providing a geological time capsule of deep-sea conditions. The species living today are not identical to their ancient relatives, but their overall structure and metabolic strategies remain recognizable. They inhabit sediment layers according to oxygen availability, feeding on bacteria and organic particles. Their shells accumulate after death, forming layers that help scientists understand long-term ocean changes. There are also microbial lineages in the trench that trace back to some of the earliest life on Earth. These microbes survive not because they are unchanged, but because their basic metabolic strategies continue to work. Chemosynthesis, anaerobic respiration, and pressure-resistant biochemistry developed early in Earth's history. In environments like the trench, where conditions mirror those ancient oceans, these strategies remain effective. Some trench microbes represent lineages that diverged from others billions of years ago, surviving in stable environments, while surface microbes evolved rapidly to adapt to light, oxygen, and new nutrient sources. When carcasses or large organic deposits settle into the trench, ancient life strategies become even more apparent. Microbial communities mirror those found around prehistoric ocean floor deposits. They break down fats, proteins, and bones using chemical pathways that have existed for millions of years. These processes generate compounds like methane or hydrogen sulfide, which in turn support other microbes. The trench floor becomes a microcosm of ancient Earth, where chemical gradients fuel ecosystems rather than sunlight. These interactions reflect how early life may have functioned before photosynthesis became dominant. Some survivors of ancient oceans are not found directly on the trench floor but along the walls. These species cling to rock faces or inhabit small crevices where minerals react with seawater. Their bodies reflect adaptations found in fossils from hydrothermal vent systems, cold seeps, and deep-sea sediments dating back millions of years. Their feeding strategies involve scraping bacterial films, absorbing dissolved nutrients, or filtering microscopic particles. Their slow, steady existence mirrors the ancient worlds that gave rise to them. The trench environment also protects ancient species by isolating them. The depth creates a barrier that prevents most shallow water organisms from reaching these areas. Pressure limits biological competition. Limited resources prevent the rapid diversification common in shallower waters. As a result, the trench becomes a refuge where certain lineages remain stable. These organisms don't compete with rapidly evolving species. They don't encounter predators that would drive adaptation. They simply continue, shaped slowly by minor environmental changes but largely independent of the evolutionary pressures seen elsewhere. This stability also influences how ancient species reproduce. Many deep-sea organisms produce small numbers of large, energy-rich eggs, rather than many small ones. This strategy mirrors ancient reproductive patterns. The eggs develop slowly, sometimes over long periods, and the offspring grow at a pace that matches the deep environment's limited food supply. The result is a life history strategy that has changed little over millions of years because it remains effective. In some cases, ancient species occupy ecological roles created by their ancestors. A worm species that filters sediment today may have descended from ancient worms that performed the same task in prehistoric oceans. A deep-sea holothurian that recycles nutrients echoes behaviours seen in fossil records. Amphipods and polychaetes fill scavenging niches that have existed since the oceans first supported multicelled life. In the trench, ecological continuity becomes visible not through visual similarity to fossils, but through the persistence of behavioural patterns. The deeper we drift into this environment, the more these survivors create an impression of immense biological time. While the surface world changes quickly, over centuries or even decades, the trench remains stable enough that life can continue with only gradual adjustments. This doesn't mean evolution stops. It simply means evolution proceeds at a pace dictated by pressure, darkness, and scarcity. Species don't disappear unless conditions change dramatically. Instead, they refine traits that already work. When we imagine the trench in its full span, from microbial life in the sediment to soft-bodied scavengers and ancient drifters, we see a system shaped by persistence rather than competition. The species that survive here do so because they have adapted to conditions that do not favour rapid change. They carry echoes of ancient oceans not because they are outdated, but because they are perfectly matched to this environment. As we linger a little longer in this realm of ancient survivors, the sense of continuity becomes stronger. Each organism represents a long history of quiet existence, shaped by stable conditions that allow ancient strategies to endure. These species form the backbone of trench ecosystems, connecting present-day life to Earth's distant past. Whenever you're ready to continue drifting into the next part of this descent, we'll move into the realm of the trench's quietest signals, where sound itself becomes a rare and unusual presence in a world defined by pressure and stillness. As we continue drifting through this deepest stretch of Pacific water in our slow descent, the ancient survivors that linger around the trench floor fade into the darkness behind us. Their quiet movements and steady presence slip away as the water around us becomes even more subdued. But there is something unexpected waiting in this near-silent region, something that feels almost out of place when we imagine how still the environment should be. Despite the darkness, the cold and the pressure, the trench is not entirely without sound. The noises are rare, subtle, and sometimes so faint that only specialized instruments can detect them, but they exist, and they reveal things about this environment that sunlight and sight never could. When people picture the deep ocean, it's natural to imagine silence, a silence so absolute that any small noise carries like a whisper through empty air. But the truth is more complicated. Sound travels extremely well through water, far better than it does through air. Even the faintest vibration can move across great distances. But here, near the trench, those vibrations don't behave the way they do near the surface. The weight of the water, the low temperatures, and the dense environment slow everything down, smoothing out edges and softening sharp noises until they become rounded pulses rather than crisp signals. The more we focus on this imagined space, the more we begin to understand how unusual any sound would be. At the surface, waves break, wind whips, boats pass, animals call. But none of that reaches here. Even the loudest storms leave barely a trace at this depth. The energy dissipates long before reaching the trench. What remains are subtle vibrations that might drift downward through layers of water, but only as faint shadows of their original form. Despite this, the trench has its own catalogue of sounds, some produced by life, some by geology, and some by forces still being studied. These sounds aren't part of a continuous chorus. They happen occasionally, in bursts or pulses that feel almost accidental. The deep ocean isn't a place of constant noise. It's a place where each sound stands out precisely because the background remains so quiet. One of the most common sources of sound in the deep ocean comes from the animals we've already drifted past. Even those that aren't built for speed or strength still produce small noises when they move. A gelatinous creature pulsing its body leaves behind a soft disturbance. A crustacean brushing across sediment creates subtle vibrations. A fish shifting its fins may produce a faint, low-frequency movement of the water. These sounds are so quiet that a human listener inside a submersible wouldn't detect them without equipment, but they matter to the organisms living here. Because sight is limited, many species use these subtle vibrations to detect the presence of predators or prey. In some species, sound becomes a deliberate tool. Certain deep-sea fish create low, pulsing noises using specialized muscles near their swim bladders. Near the trench, where swim bladders are less common because gas-filled organs collapse under pressure, similar structures take on different forms. Some species use dense, flexible tissues to create vibrations. These vibrations travel through the water as barely detectable signals. The purpose of these noises isn't fully understood. Some may attract mates. Others may signal territory or help coordinate movement in species that gather in small groups. These noises don't resemble anything familiar. They're too faint, too slow, too spaced apart to resemble fish calls in shallower waters. Farther down, near the trench floor, we encounter another category of sound entirely. Noises produced by geological processes. Even though tectonic plates move slowly, they generate occasional shifts that create vibrations detectable in the water. The subduction of the Pacific plate beneath the Indo-Australian plate produces stress along the trench. When that stress releases, small tremors occur. Only the largest earthquakes reach the surface with noticeable force, but countless micro-earthquakes happen along the plate boundary. These events generate faint rumbling vibrations that ripple through the water. At these depths, the vibrations don't produce the sharp cracking noises associated with shallow earthquakes. Instead, they spread as low-frequency waves, steady and muted, like distant thunder heard through thick walls. These geological sounds travel farther than animal noises because low-frequency waves move efficiently through dense water. Instruments lowered into the trench have recorded these vibrations lasting long after the initial tremor. The water doesn't amplify them, but it carries them with surprising persistence. In this way, the trench becomes a kind of conductor for the planet's internal motion, letting sound travel through the dark in slow pulses. Other geological sources of sound include landslides. When sections of the trench wall shift or collapse, they create underwater avalanches of sediment and rock. These events are not common on short timescales, but they occur regularly over geological time. When they happen, the movement of sediment generates vibrations that spread outward in slow waves. The sound isn't sharp. It's a deep, rolling motion, more like a shift than a crash. These sediment flows reshape parts of the trench, and the noise they create is one of the few loud events in this environment. Another class of sounds comes from the movement of gases within the sediment. Methane pockets occasionally form beneath layers of organic material. As bacteria break down these compounds, they produce gases that accumulate until they escape through the sediment. When these pockets release, the gas bubbles rise through the water. Under normal oceanic conditions, bubbles produce small popping noises, but near the trench, where pressure compresses gas into dense pockets, the release produces low, humming vibrations instead. These vibrations rise slowly, losing strength as they move upward, but within the trench itself they represent a distinct kind of sound. Even though these noises exist, they remain rare enough that long stretches of the trench contain no detectable sound at all. The silence becomes a feature of the environment, not because nothing is happening, but because most activity takes place on scales too small or too slow to register as noise. The microbial communities working through chemical processes, the soft-bodied drifters moving gently through the water, the ancient survivors slowly feeding. None of these create vibrations strong enough to break the stillness, yet sound remains one of the most important tools for understanding the trench. Researchers lower hydrophones into these depths and record noises over long periods. They listen for patterns that reveal environmental shifts or animal behaviour. These recordings provide clues about species that rarely appear on camera. They also offer insight into how the trench responds to earthquakes, landslides, and other geological processes. Occasionally, hydrophones capture mysterious noises that don't match known biological or geological sources. One example recorded in the broader Pacific is a low-rising sound known as the upsweep. The source of the upsweep is still debated, but it's believed to originate from underwater volcanic activity or the movement of hydrothermal fluids. Other mysterious sounds include slow, pulsed signals or repeating tones that appear seasonally. Many of these noises occur at depths shallower than the Tonga Trench, but similar patterns could exist here, only detectable through specialized instruments. Some researchers believe that deep-sea animals may produce sounds as part of mating rituals or territorial displays, even if those sounds are too faint for humans to perceive without amplification. In shallower waters, many fish species use sound to communicate. It's reasonable to assume that some deep-dwelling species rely on similar behaviours, especially since light-based communication becomes useless in darkness. Whether these signals take the form of low hums, rhythmic vibrations, or pulsed tones, they offer a way for animals to interact despite limited visibility. The deep ocean also carries sound from distant sources. Whales that dive to great depths produce calls that can travel thousands of kilometres. Although whales do not reach the deepest parts of the trench, their low-frequency calls can pass above it. These calls, once filtered through layers of water, become long, stretched-out signals that move like distant echoes. For an organism in the upper trench region, these noises might represent some of the only regular sound patterns in an otherwise silent world. Another kind of distant noise comes from ocean circulation patterns. Large-scale movements of water create deep currents that shift slowly across the ocean basin. These currents don't resemble surface waves. Instead, they create long, low vibrations that move across entire regions of the deep ocean. These currents influence water temperature, nutrient distribution, and sediment movement. Their sound is so faint that only highly sensitive equipment detects it, but it represents the ocean's slow, constant background motion. As we continue imagining our descent, it becomes clear that sound in the trench is both rare and revealing. Each type of noise tells a story. A faint rumble might indicate a distant micro-earthquake, reminding us of the constant motion of Earth's plates. A soft vibration could signify an animal adjusting its position in the water. A slowly rising hum might come from gas escaping the sediment. Each sound carries meaning, even if the environment remains mostly silent. If we imagine ourselves listening carefully in this darkness, we might notice how these sounds appear in irregular intervals. There is no rhythm, no predictable pattern. Instead, long periods of stillness separate short bursts of activity. A vibration might ripple across the water and fade, then nothing. Then a faint pulse, then silence again. This pattern reflects the trench's pace. Everything here happens slowly, with long pauses that fit the environment's stability. The absence of constant noise shapes the lives of the organisms that live here. Many species depend heavily on vibration sensitivity to detect prey or predators. Their bodies include organs that respond to slight changes in water movement. In some species, tentacles serve this purpose. In others, specialized lateral lines detect pressure differences. These sensory systems allow animals to navigate a world where sound is sparse but meaningful. Even microbes respond to sound indirectly. Vibrations can disturb sediment layers, exposing new nutrient gradients. This disturbance allows microbial communities to shift or grow. While microbes do not sense sound as animals do, the effects of vibrations influence their environment. The trench's rare but significant sounds also help scientists understand the geological activity occurring far below the seafloor. Hydrophones detect signals that human observers cannot. These signals reveal how often small tremors occur, how sediment shifts, and how fluid movements within the subducting plate influence the surrounding region. Because these processes operate over vast timescales, long-term sound recordings help create a clearer picture of tectonic activity. As we linger in this imagined space, the presence of sound becomes more striking precisely because the environment is so quiet. Any noise stands out. Even a faint vibration becomes noticeable against the steady background. The deep ocean doesn't have the sound structure of surface environments. It doesn't contain quick fluctuations or constant rhythms. Instead, it offers long periods of calm interrupted by occasional events that ripple through the water. This unique soundscape shapes every aspect of life in the trench. It influences how animals detect threats, how they locate food, and how they communicate. It affects how sediment shifts and how nutrients move. It reveals geological processes that would otherwise remain hidden, and it underscores the trench's identity as a place where stillness dominates and where even the smallest disturbance becomes meaningful. As we drift deeper still, the sounds behind us fade again into the background, replaced by a growing sense of something heavier and quieter. We move into a place where human presence becomes rare, and where the only disturbances come from the occasional descent of a machine built to withstand the crushing pressure. The trench becomes a realm where even sound moves slowly, shaped by the same forces that define everything else in this environment. Whenever you're ready, we'll continue downward into the next stretch of this descent, where the presence of humans in this remote place begins to appear, and where the story of how we've tried to understand this hidden world becomes part of the journey. As we continue drifting toward the deepest regions of this imaginary descent, the faint traces of sound behind us soften into nothing, and we enter a space shaped less by the natural rhythms of the deep, and more by the rare moments when humans have tried to reach this environment. These moments are infrequent compared to the trench's immense timescale, but each one leaves a distinct impression. The trench remains a world built for pressure, darkness, and stillness. Yet humans have attempted to enter it with machines designed to survive where our bodies cannot. The result is a story of limited encounters, careful descents, and brief glimpses into a world that resists being fully understood. The first thing to consider about human presence in the trench is how difficult it has always been to reach these depths. At the surface, we move easily through the air. On land, gravity shapes our movements but does not crush us. Even in shallow water, pressure changes gradually enough that our bodies can adapt. But as soon as we descend beyond a few dozen meters, the weight of the water begins to push against us. Diving becomes more complicated. Equipment becomes necessary. Air tanks, pressure suits, and protective gear help us survive in places our biology was never designed for. But none of that prepares us for the environment near the trench. At several thousand meters, pressure reaches levels that collapse steel containers, distort metal frames, and destroy any structure with even the smallest flaw. Submersibles used for deep exploration must be shaped like spheres or reinforced cylinders to distribute the pressure evenly. Any weak point becomes a risk. Engineers spend years designing vessels capable of withstanding this environment, and even then, dives are rare. The trench does not tolerate mistakes. The first explorations into deep trenches required technology far more primitive than the advanced submersibles used today. Early expeditions relied on weighted lines, crude measurement tools, and metal bottles lowered into the water to gather samples. These early measurements revealed astonishing depths, much greater than what was expected at the time. The idea that a place on Earth could reach nearly 11 kilometers below the surface challenged existing knowledge. It forced scientists to rethink oceanic structure and plate tectonics. But even after these discoveries, the trench remained mostly theoretical. Nobody had seen it up close. No human had approached it. The abyss existed only through numbers and imagination. As technology advanced, researchers began lowering cameras into the deep sea. These cameras were encased in metal housings with thick glass ports. They captured images of life that seemed impossible. Fish with translucent bodies, jelly-like creatures drifting through black water, and scavengers feeding on small carcasses. The images were grainy, often distorted, but they revealed something important. Life existed where it wasn't expected. Despite extreme pressure and darkness, the trench supported entire ecosystems. These early glimpses inspired further exploration, driving scientists to design machines capable of reaching greater depths. One of the turning points in deep-sea exploration came when bathyscaphs were developed. These vessels used air-filled floats and gasoline-filled tanks to create buoyancy. Gasoline does not compress easily, making it useful for deep-sea flotation. Bathyscaphs were designed to descend slowly, using ballast to sink and releasing weights to rise. Their spherical pressure chambers housed the crew, providing enough protection to reach depths far beyond what humans had attempted before. Even so, early dives were cautious. The engineers who designed the vessels understood that a single structural failure would be catastrophic. When explorers finally began descending into deep trenches, they discovered a world beyond anything depicted in surface environments. They saw soft-bodied fish, delicate organisms drifting through the water, and faint flashes of bioluminescence. They encountered seafloor landscapes shaped by geological forces, with ridges, sediment basins, and unusual rock formations. The environment felt alien, not because it was distant, but because it revealed how adaptable life can be under extreme conditions. Explorers described the stillness of the deep ocean as overwhelming. Machinery made small noises inside the submersible, but outside, the water remained completely silent. The darkness absorbed everything. Even with light shining outward, visibility reached only a few meters before fading into blackness. The seafloor appeared suddenly, as if rising out of nothing. It felt like entering a place untouched by time. Modern explorations of the trench use far more advanced technology. Remotely operated vehicles, or ROVs, allow scientists to study deep environments without risking human lives. These machines are equipped with cameras, robotic arms, chemical sensors, and lights capable of illuminating the immediate area. They send real-time video to the surface through fiber optic cables, allowing researchers to observe the trench floor directly. ROVs can remain in the water for long periods, collecting sediment, sampling water, or capturing organisms. Their presence in the trench creates minimal disturbance compared to larger manned submersibles. One advantage of ROVs is their ability to maneuver in ways that human-operated vessels cannot. They can approach small organisms, inspect rock formations, and position themselves carefully over sediment. Their thrusters allow fine adjustments that would be impossible for larger submersibles. Despite this, operating an ROV at trench depth remains challenging. Pressure still affects every part of the machine. Even small leaks or electrical issues become significant risks when surrounded by crushing water. Another tool used in trench exploration is the autonomous lander. These devices drop to the sea floor, conduct measurements or experiments, and then release weights to rise back to the surface. They often carry bait to attract scavengers, cameras to record movement, and sensors to measure chemical conditions. Because landers don't require continuous control, they can operate independently for long periods. Their footage reveals how trench organisms behave when not disturbed by large moving objects. Footage from landers has captured amphipods swarming around bait, showing how quickly scavengers respond to food sources. It has revealed snailfish hovering above the sea floor, inspecting objects with slow, steady movements. It has shown microbial mats glowing faintly under certain lighting conditions, indicating the presence of chemosynthetic life. These recordings demonstrate that the trench, despite its stillness, remains active. Human-operated dives, though rare, continue to provide valuable experiences. Explorers describe the sensation of descending through layers of water that become progressively colder and darker. The descent feels slow because the environment remains nearly motionless. There is no visual reference, no horizon, no sunlight filtering down. Only the bright light of the submersible reflects off the occasional particle drifting past. At deeper levels, even those particles become scarce. When the submersible reaches the trench floor, the pilot often needs to adjust for currents so subtle that they become noticeable only when the machine's lights illuminate the sediment. The movement of the currents reveals how water circulates even at extreme depths. The pilot must keep the vessel steady to avoid disturbing the seafloor. A single burst from the thrusters can create a cloud of sediment that obscures visibility for minutes or hours. Explorers who have reached the deepest points describe the seafloor as soft and fine, made of sediment that has settled over millions of years. Small rocks and occasional fragments of volcanic material break up the otherwise uniform surface. In some locations, the seafloor appears dotted with small tracks left by mobile organisms, scavengers, worms, or other animals moving through the sediment. These tracks suggest that life continues here even when not visible. Human encounters with trench species have also revealed how delicate these creatures can be. Many organisms brought to the surface cannot survive without pressure. Their bodies collapse or their internal chemistry fails when exposed to atmospheric conditions. To study these species properly, scientists use pressurized containers that maintain deep sea conditions during ascent. Even then, transporting delicate organisms requires careful control. These challenges highlight how different trench life is from surface life. One of the more compelling aspects of human interaction with the trench is how limited it remains. No matter how advanced our technology becomes, the trench imposes strict boundaries. Our machines must adapt to the environment, not the other way around. We design submarines with spherical pressure chambers because pressure demands it. We use ROVs because they can operate without risking human lives. We rely on landers because they allow long-term presence without continuous control. Humans meet the abyss only through devices that interpret the environment for us. Despite these limitations, each expedition provides insights into how the trench functions. Researchers have discovered new species, identified chemical gradients, measured pressure effects, and mapped geological features. They have observed how scavengers react to bait, how microbes respond to sediment changes, and how small creatures navigate the darkness. One of the goals of trench exploration is to understand how ecosystems develop in extreme conditions. The insights gained from studying trench microbes have influenced biotechnology. Pressure-resistant enzymes have potential applications in medicine and industry. Deep-sea organisms that produce unique compounds may help develop new pharmaceuticals. Understanding how life functions at extreme pressure may offer clues about the possibility of life on other planets. Another goal involves learning how geological processes shape the ocean floor. Studying trenches helps researchers understand plate tectonics, seismic activity, and the formation of subduction zones. These insights have implications for earthquake prediction and geology as a whole. Even though humans have met the abyss only a few times, each encounter reveals something important. The trench is not an empty space. It is a dynamic environment where life continues steadily, shaped by pressure, darkness, and time. It challenges our understanding of biology and geology. It forces us to adapt our technology to conditions far beyond our natural limits. When explorers return from dives, they bring stories that emphasize not only the scientific discoveries, but also the emotional experience of being in a place so removed from human environments. They describe the pressure of the ocean around them, the stillness of the water, the way the lights dissolve into darkness. They mention how the trench feels less like a place to visit and more like a place that continues without regard for human presence. It is indifferent to us, yet it reveals its secrets when approached with caution and respect. As we drift farther into this imagined descent, the presence of humans becomes just another fleeting moment in a much longer history. The trench has existed far longer than our species, and it will continue long after our explorations fade. But each human encounter brings new understanding, new perspectives, and new appreciation for a world that remains hidden from most of the planet. Whenever you're ready, we'll continue into the final part of this journey, where the stillness beneath our feet becomes a space for reflection on everything that exists here. everything we've passed through and everything that continues quietly in the depths. As we continue drifting through this last stretch of the descent, the presence of human-made machines fades far behind us. Their lights, their hulls, their brief disturbances become memories swallowed by the water, absorbed into an environment that has existed without them for longer than humanity has understood the world. The trench settles back into its natural state, unchanged by our passing. The water closes in quietly, the pressure holds steady, and the darkness resumes its unbroken reach. In this place, far below the surface where most life unfolds, the stillness becomes something more than absence. It becomes the defining feature of the world around us, the backdrop for every creature, every grain of sediment, every slow movement that exists here. The descent has carried us through many layers of the deep ocean, each one revealing something that either survives or persists, or adapts in ways that rarely overlap with our experiences. We passed through drifting organisms that move at the pace of the water. We encountered predators shaped by scarcity. We moved through microbial worlds that support entire ecosystems without ever being seen. We entered the domain of species that resemble life from ancient oceans, whose survival strategies trace back to times long before humanity existed. And through all of this, the one quality that remained constant was the stillness, not emptiness, not quiet, but a kind of slow, continuous motion that never draws attention to itself. As we picture ourselves drifting through this environment, that stillness feels almost tangible. It surrounds us without pressing forward. It remains in place without resisting. It simply exists, shaped by pressure, darkness, and time. The deeper we imagine ourselves moving, the more that stillness becomes familiar, as if the environment itself has no reason to change and no expectation that anything visiting it will stay long enough to matter. The trench floor stretches out beneath us as a vast soft landscape made of sediment that has settled from above over millions of years. If we focus on that sediment, we can imagine how each layer formed. Tiny particles drifted downward, slowed by water density and motion. Microbial life consumed fragments of organic matter. Larger creatures fed on smaller ones, leaving behind remains that sank slowly to the seafloor. Bits of volcanic material, tiny shells, and mineral grains joined everything else. Over millions of years, these layers compacted into a record of time longer than anything we normally consider. Each centimetre of sediment might contain the remnants of thousands of years, and the trench floor continues to gather more piece by piece without hurry. The stillness of the trench isn't the absence of life. It's the presence of a life pace that unfolds differently. Every creature we've encountered moves slowly, not because slow movement is inherently better, but because the environment demands it. Pressure makes sudden motion difficult. Scarcity makes energy valuable. Darkness renders quick reactions unnecessary. If we attempt to imagine a creature that lives at the surface adjusting to this place, we immediately understand why so few can survive here. Life at the surface is shaped by sunlight, seasons, weather, and constant interaction. Life here is shaped by a calm environment, predictable conditions, and the need to conserve energy over long periods. Even the predators move slowly. They do not waste energy chasing prey. They wait for it. They hold their position with minimal motion, using sensory organs to detect small changes in the water. When they act, they do so with precision rather than speed. That precision reflects a world where movement is expensive and mistakes are costly. The stillness allows for survival because it reduces unnecessary activity. In this way, the stillness supports life, not just by being consistent, but by eliminating the chaos that would otherwise require faster responses. As we drift over the trench floor, we might picture amphipods digging through the sediment, their movements small but persistent. Their antennae twitch as they detect chemical traces. They gather around organic matter, breaking it down over time. Their presence, though subtle, contributes to the recycling of nutrients. A little farther away, deep-sea holothurians move in slow, deliberate paths, ingesting sediment and filtering out what they need. Their tracks create faint lines across the seafloor, visible only when illuminated. These tracks fade slowly as water shifts the fine particles back into place. In the time we imagine watching, nothing dramatic happens. But if we looked again millions of years later, the shape of the trench floor would be different because of these quiet movements. Other creatures maintain their cycles in this stillness. Microbial communities continue consuming chemicals, breaking down organic molecules and releasing nutrients. Their actions remain invisible, but they influence the chemistry of the environment more than anything else. Xenophyophores form large structures that trap sediment and create microhabitats. Their shells and excretions build small ecosystems. Polychaete worms tunnel through the upper layers of sediment, aerating it and altering its structure. The trench floor is not static. It is slowly rearranged by life. The stillness also hides geological processes that unfold at their own pace. The plates beneath the trench shift continuously, though the movement is too slow to perceive. Over millions of years, these plates shape the trench itself. Subduction drags one plate beneath another. Sediment accumulates in the basin. Occasionally, a section of rock collapses, sending sediment downward in a slow underwater landslide. These events are rare on the scale of an individual life, but they influence the trench environment over long stretches of time. The stillness we imagine exists only because geological change takes place on timescales longer than anything we typically experience. Even the water itself participates in this rhythm. Currents flow slowly along the trench floor, carrying nutrients, oxygen, and particles. They do not rush, they glide. They shift direction as the ocean basin changes, redistributing material in patterns that remain steady for long periods. These currents shape the movements of drifting organisms, influence microbial communities, and help maintain the balance of the ecosystem. They are subtle, but without them, the trench would not function as it does. If we imagine ourselves drifting just above the sediment, the stillness begins to feel like a presence rather than an absence. It feels like the environment has a rhythm made of long pauses and slow shifts. Nothing breaks this rhythm with sudden noise, movement, or light. Even rare events like the descent of a submersible occur quietly compared to the dramatic disturbances found near the surface. The trench absorbs those moments and returns to its natural pace. The stillness isn't something that deep-sea life has to endure. It is something life uses. Microbes rely on stable chemical gradients that remain undisturbed for long periods. Gelatinous drifters move with the currents because rapid changes would disrupt their bodies. Predators rely on the slow pace of their environment to detect prey without wasting energy. Scavengers depend on the predictable arrival of organic matter from above. Each organism fits into the stillness, shaped by it and contributing to it. Humans, by contrast, come from a world where movement and change dominate. Weather shifts, light rises and falls, seasons alter temperatures, nothing stays the same for long. When we imagine this deep environment, the stillness feels unusual because it contrasts with the dynamic world we know. But for the creatures living here, the stillness is natural. In this imagined scene, the stillness becomes a kind of equilibrium. Pressure holds the water in place. Darkness maintains consistency. Cold slows chemical reactions. Everything works together. Even the occasional noise, like a distant tremor or the faint vibration of an organism moving, becomes part of a balanced system. If we visualize ourselves listening, we might hear a soft pulse every so often, but we would never hear a constant pattern. The trench doesn't produce a soundtrack. It offers occasional hints of activity contained within long intervals of calm. As we drift a little longer, we might imagine how this stillness affects time, not in a philosophical sense, but in a direct environmental one. Time moves at the same rate everywhere, but the way we perceive it changes based on movement, noise, and light. In the trench, where everything functions slowly and consistently. It becomes difficult to mark time in ways that feel familiar. Without changes in light or sound, without activity or turbulence, each moment blends into the next. Creatures here measure time not through cycles of day and night, but through the arrival of food, the settling of sediment, or the slow growth of microbial layers. This pacing influences lifespan. Many deep-sea species live longer than their shallow water relatives because their metabolisms operate slowly. Some fish grow over decades. Some invertebrates develop gradually, taking years to mature. The trench allows for this longevity because nothing rushes life forward. The stillness supports long-term existence. As we imagine hovering over the trench floor, the weight of water above us remains constant. It presses from all directions, not as a force that feels threatening, but as a condition that shapes everything. That pressure stabilizes the environment. It keeps gas pockets compact, slows movement, and alters chemical reactions. Without that pressure, the trench would not function as it does. The stillness depends on it. When human explorers describe the experience of reaching these depths, they often mention how the stillness becomes overwhelming. It is not frightening, just unfamiliar. The absence of sudden motion or noise creates a sense of timelessness. Light from the submersible reveals only small parts of the environment at once. Everything beyond that light disappears into darkness. The external world becomes whatever the lights illuminate, nothing more. The stillness surrounds the submersible, pressing against the hull, absorbing sound, and creating a sense of being completely removed from the rest of the planet. But for the trench, this is the norm. The stillness is not extraordinary. It is simply the environment. Every creature here is adapted to it. Every layer of sediment reflects it. Every chemical process depends on it. The trench does not anticipate change, and it does not attempt to resist it. It simply persists. As we continue picturing this descent, the stillness beneath our imagined presence feels like the natural conclusion of everything the trench represents. Not a final moment, not an ending, but a continuation of the same rhythm that has existed for millions of years. The environment will remain long after any single organism disappears. It will continue to gather sediment, support microbial life, and host creatures shaped by pressure and darkness. The trench's stillness is not empty. It is full of slow processes, long histories, and interconnected cycles that unfold across immense spans of time. It exists beneath our footsteps, beneath our ships, beneath the surface world, carrying on without needing to be seen or understood. It is a reminder that the planet contains environments that thrive beyond human perception, functioning at scales and speeds that rarely intersect with our own lives. If we drift a little longer, we might imagine how the water shifts slightly with deep currents, how a distant vibration passes through the trench and fades, or how a small organism moves across the sediment. None of these events disturb the stillness. They exist within it. They reinforce it. This stillness beneath us has always been here. It continues regardless of whether anyone descends to witness it. It does not depend on attention. It is the quiet backdrop to life that endures under conditions most living things never encounter. And even though we eventually return to the surface in our minds, leaving this imagined descent behind, the stillness remains exactly where it was, holding everything in place at a pace that belongs only to the deep.